Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, evening, night, wherever you may be. How cool is it that the BookTube community is all across the world? Anyway, it's Josh here. I'm here celebrating 10,000 subs on the channel, as well as tier ranking everything that I read this year, last year, 2024, whatever it is. I read 99 books last year, so we're going to talk about all of them. But as you just hop in the chat here, please stop in. Brian Bell from BellTube is here, and I can rank the 99 booktubers. That wouldn't be controversial or anything, would it? DNF tier. That's not one of my tiers, but I like how I commented early that Brian has a magician's tier based on a book that we both don't necessarily love. Anyway, good morning, Janny. Two of your books, I think one or two I read last year. I know That Way Lies Camelot is on here. So thank you for hanging out. It's so cool to have an author of your stature in our BookTube community for sure. And yes, I do wear the tuxedo. Occasionally, Jonathan at Words in Time wears the tuxedo as well. So I do appreciate that. Good morning, Kale, or I guess where you are, it's good evening, I guess. Hey, Joe, 99 books. Yeah. And if anyone's wondering, I am perfectly at ease, and I'm perfectly fine having finished 99 books. I probably could have squeezed in a quick novella or something just to hit the number, but didn't really want to do that because the goal was not necessarily to read 100 books last year, but to just read a lot of great books, which I did, which you'll see. I think you'll see this tier, the way I have the tiers kind of lined up, that it kind of skews high. I guess being the age that I am, I generally kind of know the things I might want to read and might enjoy. So I end up with a lot of kind of top tier reads, which is great. So thank you, Jeff. One of your books is on this list as well. Oh, Andrew, you would definitely not be a DNF tier for sure. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Jared. Good to see you. Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it. Hey, Darko. Good to see you. Thanks for hanging out. There we go. 99 Luftballons, 99 beer bottles. Yes, it's a good number. I'm okay with just having 99 books for a year. A lot of people, 99 is like a huge number. I mean, the most I've read in a year was, I think 3 years ago, I read 124. And then after that, I said that was actually too much. So I set my goal every year, actually, kind of around 80. When I plug in that Goodreads number, that's kind of what I do. But anyway, 99 was just fine with me. So good morning, Marianne. Appreciate you being here. So I'm just sitting here. I'm sipping some coffee, some Dharma Initiative coffee, if you are a big Lost fan like me. And we're going to talk about books. I had to set up, I kind of have two monitors going here to try to do this tier ranking, because it's I have to share the screen, but I also want my face on the screen as I share. And StreamYard said two monitors as I do this. So if you're wondering why I keep looking this way, this is how, once I go to the other screen, this is how I'll actually keep up with things in the chats. Once we start tier ranking, I don't know if I'll be able to put much of that on the screen unless I kind of go back and forth on kind of my tabs here. But with the tier ranking, there are 99 books, and I was thinking about it. If I talked for a minute about each book, that's still well over an hour and a half of just the books, not even just the interaction with me and you and other things. So I'm going to be kind of brief with all of these books that I tier rank. I'm not going to go in depth with them. I'm not going to talk about them a lot. But what I am going to do, I do have another tab on this kind of side monitor here of my TBR spreadsheet, where every book that I give you, I'm going to tell you when I read it. So if you do want to hear more about it, like you see it's a top tier book that you don't know anything about, and it might be something you want to read, you can at least go back to that monthly wrap up and see what it is. So I'll be doing that as we go along. Good morning, Carly. Carly just started a BookTube channel, so maybe go give her some love. The first 100 subs are the hardest to get. So I'm so happy that you're reading Killer Angels. It's a fantastic book. It was in my top 50. It's one of my favorite books of that type. So Heidi, am I still running? Yes, I am still running, but not competitively. I'm actually wearing one of my former running shirts from Steamtown Marathon from like 25 years ago. It was the first time I ever broke 3 hours in a marathon. I'm not the competitive runner that I used to be, because essentially over the last about 5 years, I've put on about 25 pounds, which hurts things. But I do still run 3 days a week, generally just, 4 or 5 miles at a shot. So I'm more of a recreational runner right now. Maybe I'll get back into it, but I did have some big successes. If you want to look at my kind of my trophy wall, you see up there, like all the kind of the running accolades I had. I had kind of a minor sponsorship and was on a race team, and I finished top 25 in a national championship at one point. So I'm not that guy anymore. I kind of miss that guy, to be honest, but I still do it more for fitness and mental health at this point. So magician ain't one of them. Yeah, I definitely appreciate it. Thank you, Kathy. I still need to watch your tier ranking. Everyone was talking about it on the Discord. So just because this will take a while, I'm going to jump into the tier. I might jump back and forth with the chat. But again, I do have this second monitor set up so I can keep track of the chat. But let's try to present the screen here so we can start the ranking. So what I want to do this. And that was a little bit of StreamYard inception. Okay, and there's a little window so you can at least see me talk about these things. So first of all, if you've ever done one of these tier ranking things, you put in all the images, and regardless of what order you put them in, it just makes them random. And I was not going to sort these. Some of these are definitely next to each other. Like I see a couple Conan books next to each other. I saw that Andy's 2 books ended up next to each other, but a lot of them are mixed up. So sometimes I'll be talking about book series out of order. I was not going to sort these 99 books because that's certainly enough. So just looking at the chat. Thank you, Brian. I mean, I appreciate getting to know you, and I consider you a great friend on BookTube. So thank you for hanging out. Janny, yes, everybody can bicker over the rankings for sure. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you being here as well. Again, just because of the way the setup, I'll be commenting over here. With all of these, I'm also going to talk about each of these books, like when I read them. So, and I guess every time I click here, let's do this. I'm going to do this. All right. That way, when I click on the thing, my face won't disappear on the screen. So, oh, wait. So looking down here, looks like I don't need that second video there. So you can tell I've never done this before. So we don't need that because I am on the screen. So, all right. Well, let's get started. So the first one here is Tortilla Flat by John Steinbeck. Tortilla Flat is kind of a sequel to Cannery Row. And Tortilla Flat is typical Steinbeck. It's kind of a slice of life in the Salinas Valley in California. If you're interested in this one, when I read this one, takes a while to scroll all the way down to T's. Tortilla Flat, I read this one in October, and Tortilla Flat is truly outstanding. Oh, I didn't talk about the tiers. I'm such an amateur. So our top tier, I call this best of the best, because if it was just S, A, B, like the top 2 tiers would be stacked. So kind of skews low, but I have best of the best at the very top. Truly outstanding is the second tier. Good to great. So this will be typical bell curve. There's going to be a lot in the good to great. So don't think of it as a B tier, but think of it as some really good or some really great books. 4th tier is mid, and then the 5th tier is skip it. And I don't take those lightly, but I certainly do have a few of those this year, unfortunately. So Tortilla Flat, first one in the truly outstanding category. Oh, and one of Janny's books is up next. That Way Lies Camelot. So this is a short story collection. And what I really enjoyed about this is just the diversity of the selections. There were a lot of different things here. It wasn't just all fantasy. There were different kinds of fantasy in there. There were some science fiction stories in there. There's like some great cat and mouse kind of space opera type in there that I really enjoyed. And then several of the stories actually linked together. which was pretty cool. Like the space opera ones with the, there were these kind of a space pirate and the guy trying to catch him. There were like 3 of those that were sprinkled out throughout the collection. And there were some other ones with an elf that I really enjoyed. But That Way Lies Camelot is also a truly outstanding selection that I read. And when did I read that one? That Way Lies Camelot was... So it's hard to find everything because of the thes. I read That Way Lies Camelot in December. So if you want to see kind of a little bit more about that one, that was one that I read in December. All right, sip of coffee. Denis Lehane, Darkness Take My Hand. This is the second book in the Kenzie and Gennaro series. You know there's a lot of Lehane on this list this year. Darkness Take My Hand is the second one, and it's maybe not as literary as some of the other ones, but the Lehane books are going to be hard to pick because, honestly, I could put them all in the top 2 tiers, but just to spread them out a little bit, I'm going to put Darkness Take My Hand in the good to great, and it's going to be more on the great end of things. So a really, really great crime thriller. It is a bit dark at times, but I did enjoy that one tremendously. The other thing I should have mentioned at the outset of this with this tier ranking, I'm not going to put them like left to right, best to worst. I mean, that's more of a true ranking than a tier ranking. So I'm just going to plop them in there. So like the best book that I read this year, which you all know what that is if you saw the Red Fury Book Awards, it's not going to be top left, best of the best, unless it's the first one I place into that tier. So just a heads up with that. All right, The Reindeer People by Megan Lindholm. This is Megan Lindholm, a.k.a. Robin Hobb. This is the first of a duology, and I really enjoyed this. This is probably my favorite work of the Megan Lindholm side of Hobb's output, which admittedly I haven't enjoyed as much as the Hobb side. I think it was a truly outstanding book. It was kind of almost a prehistoric type of fantasy and had a very compelling main character, some really great character work. This one I read in, let's see, here's where is it? Reindeer People or The Reindeer People? Okay, it's The Reindeer People. I read this one in May. So if you want to go back and see a little bit about that one, that is that. All right, A Cure for Gravity by Joe Jackson. If Heidi's still here, she was the one that actually sent this to me, and I'm so glad because it's a truly outstanding memoir. I enjoy musician memoirs because I'm a musician, and Joe Jackson was a musician I really didn't know much about, but I found his story very compelling. He was a kid from a small town that ended up in one of the best colleges for music in the UK and ended up kind of going a different path than what a typical, music student would do. But it was one of my best nonfiction reads that I read last year. So that is A Cure for Gravity. Let me just catch up with the chat a little bit if I missed anything in there. GGK to the top, absolutely. Sun Eater is probably going to be up there too. Yeah, Kathy, you might have sorted yours. It's just too much. I mean, this will take forever if I'm really ranking everything, and I'll beat myself up with it. Yeah, Dan, a lot of Lehane in there. Small Mercies is one of those. There's some great Lehanes in there for sure. The Rogue, yeah, Mr. Gribber's fantastic. Definitely read some more Lehane. Janny, I did read Wizard of the Pigeons, and I loved just kind of what she was telling there. That's probably my second favorite of all of the Megan Lindholm books I've read so far. That was definitely my favorite. All right, back to the ranking. Lawrence Block, 8 Million Ways to Die. This was the first I've read from this author. This is a work of crime fiction. It's crime noir with a first-person narrator. And I would say this is kind of good to great, but I kind of teared up at the end. What I really loved was there's a subtext of this character dealing with being an alcoholic. And I thought that portion of the book was extremely well done, probably as well done as I've read in fiction before. But it was a great crime thriller with kind of a great serpentine plot that I really enjoyed. I read 8 Million Ways to Die in what month? I read that one in May. So if you want to hear me talk about that one a little bit more. Another Megan Lindholm, this is Wolf's Brother, and this is another truly outstanding selection. I would say it's a cut below The Reindeer People. This was the second book. The ending I felt wasn't as strong as the beginning, but it was still great. I really enjoyed this duology by Megan Lindholm. And I think I read that one just after reindeer people. So why can't I say that this morning? Coffee has not kicked in. Wolf's Brother I read also in May, so that's another one. The ending kind of meandered a little bit, but I still really enjoyed that one. So a little sip of some Dharma coffee, and we'll keep going. All right, everyone knows this one. The Given Day by Denis Lehane. Best of the best. My second best book I read last year. The Given Day is my favorite work by Denis Lehane. I'm going to talk about this one because I think you should read it. I know I read it in January because it was one of those books that until I encountered another book a little bit later, I'll talk about. This was my best book of the year. The Given Day is a kind of a period piece, and it's set in just after the first World War in Boston. And it talks about kind of a lot of societal issues going on in Boston and the country at the time. And it's a remarkable bit of storytelling. And it's, in my opinion, it's one of the best works that I've read, period, of this type. It's so good. I don't always give it as kind of the book to read by Lehane because it's not really, it's kind of an outlier in his output. It's historical fiction. It's not crime fiction, but it's frankly one of the best books I've ever read. So good. The Given Day. Big plug. Go read it. I read it in January. One of the best books of the year. All right. Another one by Lehane, Prayers for Rain. This is the 5th book in the Kenzie and Gennaro series, and this is a good to great entry. It's more on the crime thriller type of output of Lehane's. And Prayers for Rain is very good. One thing I liked about it is the 4th book in the series. This is the 5th book. The 4th book, Gone Baby Gone, is the strongest of them all. And you kind of still see the fallout of that book in this book. And I really enjoyed that. I think that's one thing that a lot of crime authors don't do very well. They just kind of continue the story like nothing happened, but such big, impactful things happened to these characters in the previous book that it had to bleed into the next book. So very, very strong book. Prayers for Rain. When did I read that one? I read that one in October. So it may not have hit the heights of Gone Baby Gone, but it was pretty close. Again, all of these Lehane books were great. I did a big video on Lehane. If you're a fan of the channel and you want to support the channel, please go watch that video. It's easily the most work I've ever put into anything on the channel. It's the only thing I've ever scripted entirely. I did different audio and video type of setup. It took a lot of effort. So if you haven't seen that video, hey, go check it out. I'd appreciate it. All right, Counterpoint. This is one of the nonfiction reads of the year that I enjoyed. This is a memoir of Bach and Mourning by Philip Kennicott. And this is a story of a writer who was also a very accomplished pianist who was dealing with the death of his mother or father. I think it was death of his mother. And in trying to deal with that, he threw himself into the works of Bach and tried to learn the Goldberg Variations, which is one of the hardest works that Bach ever wrote. And it's kind of a memoir. It's kind of a discussion about Bach. And I enjoyed it. I felt it was maybe a little bit maybe less focused than I would like, but I thought in general, I thought all the themes that he was hitting, I thought he did very, very well, and it's definitely a good to great entry in the nonfiction side of things. All right, let me check the chat real quick, see if I missed anything in here. Hey, Kathy liked Joe Jackson's music. You might like the memoir then, Kathy, because I think a lot of times those types of memoirs, if you really know the works, it adds a lot more to it. Capricious Fox. Yeah, I'll be reading Alien Earth soon. I'm hoping to read the rest of the Lindholm side of Hobb's books by the end of the year. So, hey, Philip's here. Thank you, Philip. I appreciate it. Yeah, this is going to take a while, so you could probably go do whatever you need to know for sure. Heidi's going to add the best of my best to the TBR. That's cool. I had a great year for sure. Oh, look at that. Davey Hill 23. You're waking up 5 hours to drive into Bangkok. Wow. Amazing. I just love the interconnection of the world here, just talking about books, finding people in Thailand to talk about books. So such a cool thing. Gotta love modern technology. All right. Back to the ranking. So Jenny Wirtz, another truly outstanding book. This was her first book, Sorcerer's Legacy. And I was so impressed that this was a debut. Let me tell you when I read it. Sorcerer's Legacy, I read. Oh, that was another one in January. I love, which right now it's January on over on John Minton's channel. But I really love this. Had some really good court intrigue in it. It had some interesting magic. And what I really enjoyed most of this, that I remember most about this, is it wasn't structured like plot wise, like everything else that you read in this genre. And I always find when I find an interesting structure to a book, it just adds another layer of kind of intellectual stimulus to me. You know, when you do read a lot of fantasy, and you read a lot of fantasy that feels frankly like a lot of other fantasy, when you do encounter unique factors in a book, it sticks with you. And that was one of the things that really stuck with me with this one. It had a very strong female protagonist, which when this was written, you know, that wasn't a big thing at the time. And I really loved kind of the choices that she had to make in the book. So definitely pick that up. I know a lot of people are reading Wars of Light and Shadow right now, but don't sleep on the earlier works of that author. So up next is a self-published, again, hopefully this coffee will kick in here. Self-published work called Necro by C.W. Subtle. I read this one in January. This is good to great. I think it could have been truly outstanding. There's some elements of the world building that I really enjoyed, but the reason it was maybe a lower tier is that it was just really fast paced. And for me personally, I'm not a huge fan of super fast-paced narratives and fantasy. But I love that it kind of embraced the tropes and did some different things with them. It had a couple characters that there were some really cool character moments and character beats that I really enjoyed, that it might have been truly outstanding if maybe it wasn't so fast. But overall, I enjoyed the time with Necro. The author had sent me the book, well, you know, quite a bit time ago. It takes me quite a bit of time to get to author submissions. In fact, I'm not really taking them right now because my physical TBR is at 96 books right now. So I'm trying to get that lower before I start adding more books to the piles. Yeah, so that was Necro. Up next is a work by Haruki Murakami. This is Men Without Women. This is a short story collection. I'm not a huge fan of his short fiction, but I think this was one of his better collections. So I'm going to put it up in the truly outstanding category. Men Without Women was a theme that kind of permeated the short story collection. And the kind of the thing that Murakami does very well is he does always give you good protagonists that are often isolated. And you saw that in all of the short stories in here, kind of these isolated protagonists by themselves. And I felt that the stories were pretty even here. I think a lot of short story collections are uneven. And I think there's another one by Murakami that won't be quite as high on this ranking. But this one was pretty solid. If I hadn't mentioned, I read that one. It looks like I read that one in October. And there was one, I remember there was one in here that if you're a fan of Kafka's Metamorphoses, it's kind of a riff on that. I think it was called Samsa in Love. So if you like that work, you might pick up this short story collection just for that one. It was quite enjoyable. All right, Song of the Samurai. I know I read this one in December because this one's pretty fresh in the mind. It's another truly outstanding. This is, I don't think it's self-published. I think it's just a very small press. And this is one that appealed to me because my love of Japan and Japanese culture, my love of historical fiction, my love of the samurai, but even more Song of the Samurai. One of the things that the samurai monks did back then was that they played the shakuhachi, the flutes, and that was part of this narrative. And this one started kind of slow, but if you go check out my review when I talk about this in December, by the end, I really liked this when the author kind of delved into kind of the philosophical aspect of this monk's spiritual and physical journey. That's when I really, really enjoyed this book. So that's a very good one by a small press that I think I can definitely recommend here. All right, Stephen King, Night Shift. This is one of King's best short fiction collections. This is one of those, there are, I think, 19 short stories in here, and I think like 18 of them are fantastic. I finished this one in October. This one has some really good tie-ins to Salem's Lot, which I enjoyed. And there's a lot of different, it's all horror. So if you don't like horror, this might not be best of the best for you. But if you do enjoy horror, what I liked was kind of the different kinds of horror that King explores here. And I felt that this was just super, super strong. I mean, there's a big contingent of King fandom that says early King is the best King, and I'm not going to really argue with that, at least on the basis of this one. All right, let me just catch up with the chat if there's anything in here that I want to see here that I didn't see here, rather. All right, Shaw, thanks for hanging out. The Rogue, yeah, you like slower pace fantasy as well. Marianne, I think Night Shift is a good entry point for King if you do like horror, because it's all short stories and it does give you quite a bit of kind of just very diverse kind of short stories. You know, you get kind of human condition, you get some vampire, you get some cosmic horror. There's definitely some really interesting takes there. All right, back to the ranking. A Drink Before the War. This is Lehane's debut, and this is another one, really strong debut by this author. The thing that Lehane, when he's at his best, what I like is how he shows how crime is not necessarily just a single perpetrator, but how oftentimes society is often complicit in the crimes. And you see that here in this story that goes from very, you know, the street criminal all the way up to Congress people. And I really love that aspect of it. This is the first book of the Kenzie and Gennaro novels, and it's a fantastic start to that series, as well as Lehane's just output in general. Really, really great book. I had been a huge Connelly fan before I read this one. And Michael Connelly's books, you're following an LAPD detective who is, you know, pretty much by the book, always following the law. And then reading Lehane, where you get two private investigators who, often circumvent the law, bend the rules a little bit. It was a bit darker, especially as this one went along. So definitely a highly recommended work of Lehane's, A Drink Before the War. When did I read that? So hopefully I'm keeping up with that for any of you that do want to check out some of these books. Drink Before the War I read in June. So again, a really impressive debut. All right, on to some Raymond E. Feist. This is Rage of a Demon King. This is the third book in the Serpent War saga. This was my favorite book in the Serpent War saga. And this 4-book series, kind of the big climax is in this third book. And the fourth book is almost entirely falling action, but Feist makes it work because he touches upon some things that are really well done. I think in general that the Serpent War saga is almost as strong as the Rift War saga, maybe just a cut below that series, but it's certainly very strong. I do feel that more people should be reading further on into kind of the Rift War cycle, as it's called. This is as far as I've gotten. I've read basically the first 4 series, which is Rift War Saga, Empire Trilogy, the Krondor Sons Duology, and the Serpent War Saga, which is 4 books. And I think it's worth going through. I think of all the authors, I did this very consciously. I reread all of the authors from my youth that I read, not all of them, but a lot of them that I read and enjoyed as a kid. Feist, Terry Brooks, David Eddings, all the Dragonlance books, probably some others that I've forgotten. And Feist World was the one that I just felt most compelled to continue, because I do feel that it maybe has aged a little bit better. It's maybe a little less derivative than some of the other things, especially starting out, because it's obvious right away that he kind of goes his own direction. And I really enjoyed Rage of a Demon King. That was my favorite of the Serpent War saga. All right, Conan. Which one is this? I can't see. This is Conan. Oh, which one is that? Conan the Unconquered. Sorry, the font is so small. These Robert Jordan Conan books are kind of exactly what you would expect. I'm putting it in the good to great. This one, they kind of all run together, to be honest, because they're kind of monster of the week type of thing. Conan the Unconquered. I'll just read my little review here, because this was from January. I said, a good, not great, fast-paced Conan novel. The plotting felt odd. It seemed like there was a side quest with no motivating factor except for a plot convenience that came later. So that was one of the lesser ones. But most of these Conan novels are going to probably end up in this good to great tier. And that one I read in January. Guards, truly outstanding. I read this one in December. And I was nervous going into reading Terry Pratchett, because I've seen so often in fiction, I think humor's hard to do. I mean, I think it's really challenging to make humor come off the screen and not feel like, or off the page and feel like I'm wondering, okay, like, how long did it take for him to come up with that joke? That's what I always feel when I'm reading humor. But with Pratchett, because it's so intertwined with the dialogue, it just felt so natural. And I enjoyed the world building. I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the characters. I mean, one book into the City Watch series of Discworld, and I can't wait to continue. So if you haven't read Guards, it's what I've been told. It was my entry into the world of Discworld, and I think it's a great starting point, which I was told, and I can corroborate that because I certainly loved it. All right, Guy Gavriel Kay. I don't think he can write anything that's not at least truly outstanding, but this was a truly outstanding book. This is Sailing to Sarantium, and Sailing to Sarantium is the first book in his famous duology of the Sarantine Mosaic. Looking to see when I read this. I did read these two books back to back because I just love this first book so much. I read that at the end of August, and it's one of those things that the series as a whole is remarkable in that it's a huge story with a lot of scope that's told from a small perspective. And I always love GGK's infusion of art into his books. As a musician, I always gravitate towards that. And in Sailing to Sarantium, you get an artisan. He's a mosaicist as a main character. And he goes on this journey to Sarantium, which is the capital of the empire, to do a job to create a mosaic. And you meet a lot of smaller characters that tell this huge story in this duology. And it's almost, you could almost consider it one novel. I read them back to back just because I couldn't not read the second book right away. But Sailing to Sarantium is fantastic, as is this author. If you've not been on the channel, I talk about that author a lot because he has quickly become perhaps my favorite author of all time. All right, Rendezvous with Rama. I would say Rendezvous with Rama is good to great. For me, more on the good side of good to great, to be honest. First of all, I love his writing. I just read 2001. I'll do a mini review of that one in my video next weekend that's coming out. I love Arthur C. Clarke's writing. I think of the three classic authors that everyone kind of pairs together: Asimov, Clarke, Heinlein. I think those three, I think he's probably the most skilled as far as just the power of the pen, as they say. I didn't love Rama because I felt that once they were kind of exploring this, it almost felt like, okay, I'm going to write my geology chapter now, as they explored Rama from a geological background. Like, okay, now we're going to tell a archaeology story in this next chapter. And it just felt really disjunct to me, which was disappointing because I thought of the three, this might have been my favorite, but it wasn't. The three Clarke books that are most famous, but it's still a good book. I think a lot of people put it a lot higher than me. For me, science fiction, the harder the science fiction, kind of the lower my enjoyment, the harder the science is, I should say. So it's still very good to great, as I put it there. Let me see if there's anything in the chat I want to catch up with here. Janny, Sarantium's opening is fantastic. The core series went elsewhere. Great duology, not bickering with that one. Absolutely. Jay reads fantasy. Oh, you're reading Sarantium later this month. Awesome. Hope you really love it. Shad, I hope you read it as well. And Kathy agrees with Feist. He definitely holds up. In fact, Kathy, that would be a good question for our question of the day for the Fireside Discord. Kathy does that on the Discord for us. She gives you a question of the day. We could do something like, what did you read as a kid that held up most? Or maybe the opposite of that too. I think he does hold up most of all of those authors that I mentioned. The Rogue, surprising amount of people miss the point of the series being called the Sarantine Mosaic. Absolutely true. Kathy preferred Rama to 2001. I can see that, although I didn't personally. Marianne, same way. Yeah, the hard sci-fi, it's just tougher for me. I guess I like more of the sci-fantasy, the softer sci-fi. I like the ideas rather than more of kind of the technical aspects of science, for sure. I don't know if I mentioned when I read Rendezvous with Rama. That was in April. Okay. All right, let's move on to Last Light of the Sun. Another truly outstanding work by Guy Gavriel Kay. This is kind of his Viking tale, which you can tell by the cover there. This was one of the few ones. There's only a handful of books by Kay that didn't hook me right away. But Last Light of the Sun, it took a little bit, but once I was hooked, I really enjoyed this story. The thing I like most about Last Light of the Sun is, with the exception of Tigana, this is the book that out of the 10 that I've read by this author so far, that has the most magic in it. And it's a kind of fairy magic. And because it's set in the British Isles, so it makes sense that that would be kind of the magic that you would experience. And I thought the passages with the fairies and the fairy magic were just so well done, so otherworldly. I know a lot of people don't love this author as much as me because they don't like not having a lot of magic in their fantasy tales, but this is one that does have quite a bit. And it was one of those. There's also the character that emerges as the main protagonist has a truly incredible character arc in this book. So it's one that flies under the radar. You don't hear people talk about it a lot. And admittedly, I don't feel it's top tier K, but it's still top tier fantasy as far as I'm concerned. So don't sleep on The Last Light of the Sun. I read that one in, let's see. I read The Last Light of the Sun in October. So really, really good one. All right. Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens. This one's good. Dickens is a bit inconsistent for me. I do read one work of Dickens every summer. It's just kind of a thing that I've done. I did for a while, took a few years off, and I'm back to doing it since I do have a nice Dickens collection up there on the shelf. Old Curiosity Shop was pretty good. The problem with Dickens, I think, is just like a lot of works of the 19th century, when you're paid by kind of installments, it can be a bit bloated. I also felt his characterization wasn't quite as good in this one. I think when he's his best, some of his best works have some of the most memorable characters. You know, thinking about David Copperfield is probably one of his very best works. Those characters are very vivid to me. This one, they were kind of a little flat. I read, it had him in the summer. I read it early. I read this in May. So it's an early work of Dickens. If you're completionist like me, definitely read it. If not, make sure you hit the heavy hitters first. Becoming a Druid by Mike Mullman. This is good to great. This is one that I really like the story. I kind of like the world, but for me, the reason that it wasn't higher, because I've seen a lot of people talk about this book and place it higher in their ranking, is that a lot of the exposition is driven by dialogue. And for me, I kind of get almost exhausted reading a lot of dialogue, one right after another. And there was a bit of that in there. But I loved having a druid as a main character. And this is a very flawed main character, which I think Mullman did a really great job at, just making you see kind of the flaws within this overall character. But the dialogue held it back from being an upper tier book for me. But I certainly enjoyed my time with it. Becoming a Druid, I read that one in May. So we're at the same month as Dickens. All right, The Garden Gnome. The Garden Gnome is by Jeff McIntyre. It's a first book in a series. Second book is about to come out. This was a finalist for my Fury for favorite self-pub of the year. And Garden Gnome is fantastic. I would say the only problem with The Garden Gnome, honestly, is the cover. But there's a new cover coming out, and Jeff shared it with me, and it's literally like if I would have said, this is what the cover of this book should be, it literally what it is. Because this is not the whimsical type of garden gnome that you would expect based on this cover. It's not a whimsical tale at all. It is a very different kind of story, and it's kind of a modern day fantasy story with some really, really great and imaginative elements. So Garden Gnome was truly outstanding read of mine last year. And I don't know when Jeff is revealing that new cover, but I'll definitely share that because I think it kind of evokes what the story is really about. And this is one that really stuck with me throughout the year. That's why it was one of my finalists for Fury of the Year for that. And I read The Garden Gnome in A lot of scrolling. I read that one in July. So don't judge a book by its cover. It's a really, really great book. If you want to hear me talk about it, I talked about it in July. All right, another one by Murakami, Blind Willow, Sleeping Woman. This is one of the ones that I think we have to start the mid tier with one of my favorite authors. But this was a really uneven short story collection. It had a little bit of great, a little bit of great ones, a little bit lesser. So I think what I struggled with most in this one is when the short stories were very short. If you've read Murakami, I think one word to describe Murakami is he's often weird. And in the shorter stories in this collection, there wasn't enough time to kind of settle in with the weirdness of it to really appreciate what he was trying to say, at least for me. I enjoyed the longer short stories in this collection more than the shorter short stories. And it was because of that. I think he's better at the longer form because I always say his music, his books are magical surrealism, not magical realism, because there's so many weird things he throws together. And I think it takes a while to get used to it. So I think this is the inaugural mid one in this tier list. I read Blind Willow, Sleeping Woman in May. I must have read a lot of books at May, or they just ended up all together at the same time. All right, Cormac McCarthy, Outer Dark. It was good. I didn't love it. I honestly don't think this is an author for me, despite my love for The Road. I've read 4 by him so far, and that's the only one I can truly say I enjoyed. I read Outer Dark in, is that June or July? July. It's one of those, like, I admire his writing, and I admire that he's willing to confront kind of darker aspects of the human condition. But as a story, I mean, this one, I mean, it kind of fell flat for me. All right, Shutter Island by Denis Lehane. Probably on the great side of good to great. This is a perfect execution of a crime thriller. In fact, I'm going to move it up to truly outstanding. I think I have a little bit of a bias with Lehane, having read everything, where I will automatically put his more literary works higher and his more thriller works lower. But maybe I shouldn't do that, because this is a perfect execution of a thriller. There's a great adaptation. I remember the movie being great. It's been a while since I've seen it, but it's a great standalone by Lehane. So if you do like crime thrillers, I mean, honestly, it's one of the best ones out there. So let me just peek in at the chat, see how we're doing there. Let's see. Oscar Wilde said about the old curiosity shop, one must have a heart of stone to read The Death of Little Nell without laughing. Oh, that's good, Duffy Pratt. Oh, Jeff. Jeff's here in the chat. Hey, Jeff. About a month out for the reveal of the I don't know if that's for the reveal of the new cover of Garden Gnome, or if the second book is coming out, but I'm really interested in that. Jay Reed's Fantasy. Oh, you actually bought Garden Gnome after mentioning it. That's very cool. It's great. Anon Savage loves The Road. Joseph DeWitt. Yeah, I've not read Blood Meridian. We'll see. The Rogue. McCarthy is hit or miss for me as well. Yeah, it's been up and down, but I mean, I'm still counting down my top 50. The Road's in my top 20. So, I mean, when he's a hit for me, he's a huge hit. Kathy said Shutter Island was a great film. Jay Reed's Fantasy. Road, amazing. Blood Meridian, worse. Janny. Oh, Lehane's one of your husband's favorites. That's fantastic. I think for you, if you read one, I would probably recommend The Given Day. I think just the thematic depth of that book is tremendous. And it's historical fiction, not crime fiction. But yeah, Lehane is a favorite. Definitely enjoyed exploring his books a lot last year. All right, on to a couple Conan books in a row. We got Conan the Triumphant. I'm going to check my notes here. I read solid, great plotting. So I guess this is a good to great one. Again, these all kind of ran together for me because I won't say they're forgettable. That's insulting, but they're not as memorable as maybe some other books. They're all shorts. They're meant to be consumed kind of in a day or two. They're all 150 to 200 pages. It's Jordan, so it's great. I think he elevates the stories quite a bit and makes them a lot better than maybe a lesser author would do. But Conan the Triumphant, I read in, looks like I read that one in June. That was probably, just looking at, because I'm looking at my ranking here, that was probably that one and one more, the Victorious one, I think are probably the two strongest. Is that up next? No, this is Conan the Magnificent. I will say with these Conan stories, I mean, I love the covers. I mean, I'm tempted to just go buy the paperbacks just to have these amazing covers. I just love the fantasy art from the 80s. Just fantastic. Look at that. Conan the Magnificent, another good to great one. This one was, I read this one in March. All right, Lord of Emperors, absolutely best of the best. That's the second book of the Sarantine Mosaic. This is a book that many people consider Kay's finest book. It's certainly an S-tier book for him, and I love this. I mean, I wept at the end of this book. I thought it was such a beautiful conclusion to this duology of the Sarantine Mosaic, and it's just a beautiful book and a beautiful series. Go read it. Go read Kay. If you haven't, do it. Nicholas Raven and the Wizard's Web by Thomas J. Prostopnik. This one has a lot of promise, but the way that the author, this is self-published work, the way that the author structured the story for me made it problematic. He basically wrote one huge novel. It's like 1,000 pages or more. And then he releases it into 3 installments, but they're not really released as 3 novels. He kind of stops a third of the way through. So this is like chapters 1 through 20. And the second one is chapters 21 through 40. And the third one is like 51 through 60 or whatever. So it didn't really have a logical conclusion. And the author actually said he may consider revising a little bit with that, because I think there's a good story in there, but the plotting issue that this book didn't really end. It just kind of ended, and there wasn't a logical ending point to this book. I think I have to put it in the mid tier. So I'm always going to be honest with my reviews. So as much as I do want to support self-published authors and so forth, I'm going to place them where I feel that they really need to be in the tier ranking here. As an artist myself, my favorite professors were not the ones that candy-coated things. If I gave a bad performance and they told me it stunk, they were honest. You know, if the truth hurts sometimes, I appreciate it. So I will always be honest with my reviews here. Nicholas Raven and Wizard's Web Volume 1, I reviewed that one in March, if you do want to hear a little bit more about that one. All right, Tress of the Emerald Sea. This is a good to great one by Brandon Sanderson. I like the whimsy of it. It's kind of a slight tale. I think all of these kind of standalones that he has, I think that's kind of the goal, is to try to show a new world and show a little bit different. I love his imagination. I mean, the sea itself was just incredibly done. Tress was kind of one of those characters that, honestly, I found her annoying at the beginning, but she just grew on me by the end of the book. So it was a good to great book for him. It's a little bit YA in my mind, but I think overall I did enjoy it. I read this one in April. All right, Moonlight Mile by Denis Lehane. This is another good to great entry by Lehane. This is the final book, the 6th book in the Kenzie and Gennaro series. And it's a very slight book. Like all the other books are probably 400 pages, and this one's about 250. And it acts kind of as a coda. He actually stopped writing the Kenzie and Gennaro books. He wrote his first 5 books. And then he didn't write another one of those for a decade. And I think he just told this tale to kind of wrap up their story, but it's actually set a decade after the 5th book. So it's in many ways just kind of a coda to the story. It doesn't have very high Goodread ratings, but I think if you read those first 5 books, you do need to see the end of the story, even if it's maybe a bit lesser. But I don't think it's the worst of the 6 books. I mean, with Lehane, there's not really worst. There's only one book of his that I'll get to here. Actually, I didn't reread it this year because I remembered it. There's only one of his books that aren't one of these top 3 tiers for me. I read Moonlight Mile in... read that one in October. Okay. All right. David Gemmell, Quest for Lost Heroes. That's another truly outstanding. I love Gemmell. Gemmell has been another favorite author I've discovered since I started the channel here. Quest for Lost Heroes is a standalone in the Drenai series. I look forward to finishing the Drenai series to put out a video about kind of some reading advice, because there's actually a couple different ways I think you could tackle these Drenai books. This one is a standalone, and it's a quest. And it's also quite dark at times. I mean, there were a couple of times where I was just like, wow, this is a lot darker than I was expecting in this kind of heroic fantasy brand of books that Gemmell talks about. But I loved it. I'm a sucker for a quest. It's probably, with the exception of maybe the fellowship trope, found family trope, the quest trope is probably my favorite in fantasy. I read this one in June. Oh, and I can tell you my full review that I wrote on my spreadsheet here. Oh, how I love an old school fantasy quest. I wish I discovered Gemmell 30 years ago. Yeah, fantastic book by him. All right. I hate to do this to one of my favorites, but I think The Gypsy by Stephen Bruss and Megan Lindholm is in the mid tier. I really struggled with this one. This is an urban fantasy. The thing I'll say is I still love the writing, and I had a chat with Evie about this on her channel, and neither of us could really determine who wrote which parts of the book, which I think that's amazing that authors can collaborate like that, where you can't say, oh, well, that was Lindholm, that was Brust. I think they did a good job with this, but this is one of those narratives. I thought it was kind of all over the place, and I know a lot of people really enjoyed it, but for me, I really struggled with this one. I didn't enjoy The Gypsy very much. It just, the disjunct narrative style. The one thing that I struggle with is when a book only stays with a POV for like a page and a half before it jumps. This happens so often, and for me, it breaks up the flow. I love getting immersed in literature, and this one was one that was impossible for me to get immersed. So let's do a couple more, and then I'll check in on the chat. Oh, it's time to start the Skip It. So, hate to do it to you, Dragonlance. Skip It. This is Dragonlance, Kender, Gully Dwarves, and Gnomes. This is Dragonlance Tales, Volume 2. The sheer nature of short story collections with a lot of authors is going to make them kind of vary, because you're going to have some good ones, you're going to have some bad ones. This one, there was not a whole lot in here that I really enjoyed. The first volume of the Tales, I think, was the best of the three. And this one, I think, was probably the lowest of the three. I read Kender, Gully Dwarves, and Gnomes in February. I think the only one in there I really liked was Weiss and Hickman had a novella that had kind of followed Caramon's Sons from the first book. So that was pretty good. All right. The King's Buccaneer by Raymond E. Feist. Good to great. This is the second book of the Crondor Sons duology. And this is a seafaring tale, which isn't my favorite, to be honest. I'm never been a huge fan of kind of nautical stories, but this one's really good. And the Crondor Sons duology, you can't skip, because it really does set you up for what happens in Serpent War. But there's a lot of really good in this. I mean, the Crondor Sons duology is two really great adventure tales in fantasy. And it's definitely a good to great installment there. I read this one. I know it was early in the year. Let's see. Read The King's Buccaneer I read that one in April. All right, let me glance back at the chat, see what I've missed in here. Let's see, missed a bunch. Okay, let's see. Gotta scroll all the way up. Here we go. Janny, I do hope you enjoy Given Day. Heidi, besides Gwyn and Buellman, Stephen Graham Jones, another author, hope you try soon. Yeah, all three of them are on the Some Dates TBR. And I've had recently a lot of people tell me that they think I'll like Buellman. So I definitely want to do that. Glad to see I turned another person on to the Lehane stuff. Yes, Janny, I agree that Frank Frazetta's original paintings of the Conan art so much better than what we get now. Yes, I do need to read some Gwyn. Yeah, just don't tell the brothers Gwyn. I haven't read Papa Gwyn yet. yet. I definitely will. Let's see. Non-Savage is reading Faithful and the Fallen. Yeah, I'll get there. Kathy, Song for Arbonne. Yes, I hope you love it as much as I do. In fact, everybody, if you're a Song for Arbonne fan, Dutch Greybeard just came out with a fantastic review that I watched this morning about that book, and he called it the greatest fantasy book ever, ? And I think exclamation points, or anyway, I love it as well. Another one, when I finish my top 20, you know that that's going to be in there. Question is, how high is that book? I love that book. Heidi's reading Dragonflight. I read those in high school, and I don't remember. I need to go back to some Anne McCaffrey. The Rogue, I hope you enjoy Song for Arbonne as much as I love it. Hope I get to Ryan Cahill. Yeah, I probably will. I read the free novella. Was it The Fall? And I did like it, so I'll probably come back to that. Okay, Danny's recommending Deep Shadow by Randy Wainwright. Pause for a second to write that down. Okay, always looking for great recommendations. Let's see. The Rogue didn't like Dragonlance. I did like Dragonlance Legends. Chronicles was very derivative. I liked Legends. It got a little metaphysical, and I thought it was a better series as all. Joseph DeWitt, Prince of the Blood, yes, excellent. Going into Krondor's Sons, for sure. Kathy, I haven't read Deathgate Cycle. I heard Alan talking about that series a couple years ago, and it's on the Someday TBR spreadsheet, so I'll definitely get to theirs. Hey, Nikhil, thanks for hanging out. Good to see you here. All right, back to the ranking. So I'll try to pop back into the chat a little bit more periodically, so I don't have so many to catch up on. So Conan the Victorious, I think I mentioned this is one of my favorites of his, but they're all the good to the great. I don't think any of them are maybe the truly outstanding tier. I read Conan the Victorious when, let me scroll down. Conan the Victorious, I read in July. And I did say that I felt the last two in the omnibus were the strongest. That was Conan the Triumphant and Conan the Victorious. And I said, Jordan's sometimes overly descriptive writing style works perfectly in these lighter stories as it adds some depth to these quick reads. So, cool. That's all the Conan books. All right. Time for another top tier selection. That's House of Chains by Stephen Erikson. This is, I don't know. I need some time away from the Malazan books for me to know if this is my favorite or not. But right now it still is. I know I read this in November. I read this over Thanksgiving break. House of Chains was remarkable for me. I think for me, one of the reasons I loved House of Chains so much is that it was the moment where I think I finally connected with Erikson's kind of rhythm in his writing style. And it just took a while because it's real tough in the first book. And then the second, third books are very dense. And this one is as well. But I think I was finally used to Erikson's style of storytelling that I just thoroughly enjoyed this. If you watch my vlog, I think every time I did a vlog update, I was just pretty much loving the book. And I had even gone in maybe a little nervous about House of Chains as to whether it was going to be, whether Memories of Ice was just a great installment and I was back to struggling through Malazan, but that wasn't the case. I loved House of Chains. There's a character named Karsa you meet on the first book of the books within this series, within this book, and probably my favorite in the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen right now. So House of Chains, absolutely top tier for me. All right, Bloodstones by Tori Tekken, another truly outstanding work, self-published author. This was extremely well done. Not only the world building that I loved, but probably my biggest compliment I can pay to any self-published author is when I feel that there's a great level of polish on what they've written. And that's what I felt with the Bloodstones, is that this was a book where I wasn't noticing things like plotting issues. I wasn't noticing things like pacing issues. I wasn't noticing typos or formatting or anything. Just the whole reading experience. I mean, it was just like reading a traditionally published work. And I felt that the characterization was very strong. There was a really great plot turn at the end of the Bloodstones that took me by surprise. I should have seen it coming, which those are the kind of the best plot turns in my mind, is when you have a plot turn that happens that surprises you, and then you're like, oh, why didn't I see that coming? Well, she does that to you. It's the first book in a series called The Legend of the Bruhai, and it's a really great start to that series. Let's see when I read the Bloodstones. I read the Bloodstones back in, I read that one in September. Okay, but yeah, really great story there. Michael Connelly, Crime Beat. This is a rare one. I'm going to put a Connelly book in a mid-tier, only because this is his nonfiction book, and all this is basically a collection of newspaper articles that he wrote. The best part of this collection was at the very beginning when he was reflecting upon his life as someone on the crime beat, and that part of the book was the best. And the rest of this was just a collection of newspaper articles. And I know newspapers aren't a thing anymore, but in the old print newspaper articles, when you had a series of articles, the next installment of the series would always kind of just recap what happened in the previous. So like if you had a series of 4 articles in a row about a certain crime or certain criminal, you had to get through the recap where you just read the previous article. So this is the only Connelly book that I will say skip. In fact, let's put it down there. Yeah, Crime Beat. Michael Connelly is, not including this one, is the most consistently great author I've read. I've read all 40 of his books. His nonfiction work here is the only skip it one. Everything else, he's a master of crime fiction for sure. All right, Stephen King, You Like It Darker. Let's put this one up in the truly outstanding tier. This is his latest book. It's a great collection of short stories, and it's a great collection of really dark stories. I did an individual review on this one if you do want to see when that came out. It was, I don't know exactly when it was, but it looks like I read this in June. So probably I did that June or July. I did a dedicated review on You Like It Darker when I started my Stephen King short fiction project is what I'm calling it. That was the first episode of that. And it's a really strong collection. I think King's short fiction is probably his most underrated aspect of his works. The big criticism a lot of times with Stephen King is that he can't write a great ending. Well, in short fiction, the ending is a little less important than the story itself. So I think a lot of times he is able to just kind of excel in what he's doing. But You Like It Darker is definitely a great one by King. Probably his strongest new release of maybe 5 years, to be honest. All right, Live by Night by Denis Lehane. This is going to be another truly outstanding work by this author. This is the second book of the 3 Coughlin novels. You see the Given Day up top is the first of the Coughlin novels, but I call them Coughlin novels, not series, because it's not necessarily a series. Live by Night is set a few years after the Given Day, and it changes genres. Given Day is historical fiction. Live by Night is crime fiction. It follows a different character. Instead of following the main character from the Given Day, it follows his younger brother. Given Day follows a police officer. Live by Night follows a criminal. Younger brother goes to a life of crime. And it's more on the crime thriller side of Lehane's output. And it's not quite up to the level of the Given Day, in my opinion, but it's a truly outstanding book. I think pound for pound, the 3 Coughlin novels are the greatest works by Denis Lehane. StoryTube just did a great video on that. If you want to go check that out. I did a video about the Coughlin novels back in January, which is when I read this one as well. All right, let's do one more, and then I'll check the chat, see where we are. Prince of the Blood by Raymond E. Feist. This is a I would say good to great. The Crondor Sons books I think are good to great. I think I liked this one maybe a little bit more than the second book, The King's Buccaneer, just because this was a little bit different kind of story. It wasn't kind of a sea tale, a nautical tale. The Crondor Sons follows different characters. Prince of the Blood follows kind of the older twins, and King's Buccaneer, the younger brother. And they're important from a world building standpoint. So I do enjoy Prince of the Blood, did enjoy it quite a bit. All right, let me peek at the chat, see how everyone's doing. We're an hour in. glad you're all here and hanging out. Let's see. Witness, yes. It's funny, Rogue, with the Witness. I'd seen that on the fireside. We have that as an emoji, and I never knew what it meant. So I finally know what it means, and I agree. Yeah, the Rogue, the Seven City stuff is amazing. Can't wait to see kind of the end of what they call the trilogy of books 2, 4, 6. Another Witness in there. Janny's not disagreeing with House of Chains. Yes, I agree. I can't wait till Tori puts out her sequel, because this was great. Wizard in Training, Deadhouse Gate's a bit rough. Yeah, I mean, Erikson's not an easy read, and but I hope you enjoy Memories of Vice. I would consider, well, I'm going to talk about Memories of Vice, so I won't give that away, but I do consider most of my Erikson reads so far top tier. Let's see. Joseph wants to recommend Indubious Battle. Yeah, I'll do that one. I'm going to eventually read everything by Steinbeck. And in fact, I see one coming up soon. If It Bleeds. Kathy agrees on Crondor Sons. And yeah, I agree. The King's short fiction is definitely elite as far as King's output. All right, let's see. Oh, we got some Steinbeck. Yeah, To a God Unknown. This is either truly outstanding or good to great. I think I'll put it in the good to great, probably more on the great side of things. This is one of his novels that flies under the radar. What I really enjoyed most, and what stuck with me most in this one, is there's an aspect of the main character's connection with kind of his land in, of course, Salinas Valley, California, which is setting a lot of Steinbeck's works, that almost bordered on magical realism. And it was just enjoyable to see this author that is literary fiction, frankly, that I love, almost border on kind of magical realism in this story. So I enjoyed that one tremendously. Howling Dark, Christopher Rocchio, second book of Sun Eater, is truly outstanding. Probably my favorite of the series so far. I think the first book, even though I think I gave them both 5 stars, the first book, it took me a while to get used to kind of his writing style, because I felt it was a bit, how do I put it? I don't think disjunct is accurate. He kind of varies his writing style, because sometimes it's a first-person narrative, so sometimes it's very straightforward where he's telling you the story, and then sometimes it gets very flowery and kind of philosophical, and I felt that took me by surprise so much in the first book. It kind of took me from the story, but seeing it now as this older character is kind of waxing poetic about his life, that's what's happening in these big, super purple kind of descriptions, that it's just this character kind of reminiscing, and it's a little less disjunct at that point. But I think everything about Howling Dark was superior to the first book, which may end up in the same tier, to be honest. But I really look forward to continuing. I'll be starting as soon as probably Tuesday or Wednesday, I'll be starting the first volume of the short fiction works of Rocchio. I remember this one. I read this one in December. All right. Let's see. What do we got next? We got Michael Connelly, The Waiting. Connelly's truly outstanding. This is a Ballard and Bosch book. Kind of his newest detective is a younger detective named Renee Ballard, and it has Harry Bosch in there as well. Connelly's he's Mr. Consistent. To be honest, with Connelly's works, I would say if I were to do a tier ranking of Connelly, like out of the 40 books, like 35 of them are going to be truly outstanding. And then you're going to get a few outliers, best of the best, and a few good to great, because he's just Mr. Consistent. He used to be my reading slump buster. I kept a couple Connellys in just lying there waiting to read in case I read a couple bad books in a row. I read The Waiting in October, and I think I read it in 2 sittings because I just couldn't put it down. All right, Small Mercies. Man, is this top tier or not? Man, that's tough. Yeah, I'm going to put it up there. Small Mercies is Lehane's best book best book, latest books, not his best book. Given Days his best book. This is another kind of period piece, and it's a hot summer in Boston. And again, when Lehane's at his best, he's examining society, not just crime. And here you get a lot of societal things going on, leading with kind of the integration or the integration of the schools in Boston. And there's a crime that happens, and it's set in South Boston. You get a really memorable main character. What's also remarkable about this book is it's very concise, and it's about 300 pages, and it's a pretty strong book. If someone tells me it's their favorite by Lehane, I'm not going to push back at all. All right, Raymond E. Feist, Rise of a Merchant Prince. This is the only book of Feist that would do this and put it in the mid tier. This was a book, frankly, it's the second book of the Serpent War saga, which you see I've put the third book up in the truly outstanding tier. It dealt with finance and economics and trade and all of these things that I frankly don't want to read about in my fantasy tales. A lot of people loved it and they would put it top tier, but for me, I just felt this book was overly long. Additionally, some of the character choices of the main character made me kind of hate him throughout the book. So this was just a bit of a mid book for me. The only one of his I've read so far that would be kind of that low. And he did kind of rebound for me. And you can see that Rage of a Demon King is up there for the truly outstanding tier. Let's see. When did I read Rise of a Merchant Prince? I read Rise of a Merchant Prince in... I read that one in October. So there we go. All right. Blood Rights, Jim Butcher. I would say this one, I don't remember which number this one is in the series, but I think it's probably good to great. So we're stretching the screen here. But I knew that truly outstanding and good to great is going to be the bulk of my year, because that can sum up my year for sure. Blood Rights, as I was going through this, I really enjoyed just kind of the layering, the world building. And that's what I've enjoying most about Butcher's works. Let's see. That one I read in April. All right, Denis Lehane, Gone Baby Gone. Top tier Lehane, the finest of probably all of his crime novels. This is the fourth book in the Kenzie Gennaro series. You could technically read it by itself, but the thing about this one is the third act just raises this book almost above works of crime fiction. I think the themes, the dark themes that come into play here, it's one after another. You almost feel like you've been sucker punched continually because of just what he does to you at the end of this book. It's kind of a dark story. I mean, Gone Baby Gone is about a child abduction and Kenzie Gennaro trying to help find the child. So it's definitely not for the faint of heart. It's gritty, it's real, and it's remarkable. So that's why it's up there. All right, Emperor of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. This is the third book of the Broken Empire trilogy. I would say that's good to great. It wasn't my favorite of the trilogy. I think the trilogy did end well. It ended a lot better than it started, which you'll see whenever I get down to, I guess it's down here, Prince of Thorns. But Emperor of Thorns, I think it did end well. I thought the story did meander a little bit. It felt a little bit bloated, but it was still a very, very good book. I really liked Lawrence. Even though I didn't love this series, I loved his writing enough that I'll definitely be reading more of the author for sure. All right, let's do one more, and then I'll check the chat. Cloven Hooves by Megan Lindholm, and you can see marketing. They put Robin Hobb. Also writes as Robin Hobb. This is another one. Man, I hate to do this because Robin Hobb is a top 3, top 2, maybe top author of mine, but I did not like this book. And I know this pains me to even see her name in the skip it tier because I have such love for this author and love for this work. But I always say that Ludwig von Beethoven's my favorite composer, and he wrote Wellington's Victory, which is one of the worst pieces of music ever written. So even a genius of the stature of Robin Hobb is going to write things that maybe everybody doesn't love. Now, some people will love this. I did not love this because so much of this is just kind of the things that I don't read and don't like to read in literature, and namely that is modern day people with kind of modern problems. And so much of this book was that. It was about a woman and her bad relationship with her husband and her husband's family, and they move in with the husband's family, and the characters were so over the top, insufferable. I was just not enjoying it. I didn't like the woman because she wouldn't advocate for herself, and it was really a tough read for me. Your experience may differ. I would never say, like, to, even though it's a skip it tier, but don't take my word for it because I love this author. She's just amazing, but I really didn't like Cloven Hooves. I read it in December. If you do want to see me talk about it, I did love the ending of it. And that was kind of the saving grace of it, is the very end was just truly beautiful, but I just didn't enjoy like 60% of the book. So, honestly, that pains me to put that there. All right, I need to do one more before I go to the chat. Hopefully, you're not killing me in the chat right now. King Rat by James Clavell. King Rat's very good, and I think I like it more than when I liked it when I gave my review. I think my issue with Clavell is that I think I read his best book first. And I think it's just been, he hasn't reached the heights there of that. King Rat's very good. It's very autobiographical for him. He was a POW in a Japanese internment camp in World War II. And that's what this story is. So it's a shorter book. And I think the one reason that I initially didn't love it, maybe as much as I do and do like it now, thinking back on it, is that it doesn't really belong in the Asian saga. Of all of the other books that I've read the first three. This is considered the fourth book chronologically. There's no tie-in to anything else. Now, maybe it'll tie into the last two books, but the first three books, there were characters and descendants and places and things that linked together, but this one didn't really have that. So it wasn't top tier Clavell for me, but it's still in the good to great tier. It is still a really enjoyable book, and that I think probably a lot of you would enjoy. I read King Rat in August. All right, let's check the chat, see if I got caught up, see if everyone's yelling at me for Cloven Hooves. All right, let's see. Where was I? Yeah, Sun Eater, I hope it keeps getting better and better. Shaw's on Kingdom of Death. Yeah, I'll get there soon. Can I read Serpent War Saga without reading the Rift War series? I would say no. I mean, actually, technically, yes, but there are some characters that continue that I think it's important to meet them. Same thing with Krondor's Son's Duology. Probably my favorite character in the entire of those three, of the Rift War, Krondor's Sons, Serpent War, that follow that narrative trajectory. My favorite character is introduced in Krondor's Sons. So yeah, I think it does help. All right, Janny, I defer to you. Yeah, it is with Cloven Hooves. It is kind of an abused woman's POV. Cool. All right, back to, let's see. I did that one. Okay. Back to Death Masks. I think Death Masks. Let me check when did I read this one? This was March. And this is a truly outstanding one. I did enjoy this one. This is one that we were building up to kind of, I think the highs where we reach Deadbeat, which we'll see that pretty soon. Again, my favorite thing is the world building in this series, the layering of things that continue out through the trajectory. This was one that I do remember. It wasn't the first one I listened to on audio, but I don't do a lot of audio books, but these Dresden books are really, really good on audio. And I thought that James Marsters just adds maybe a little bit more likability to the character than is maybe on the page, in my opinion. If you want to hear me more talk about the unlikability of Harry Dresden, next week when I talk about Proven Guilty in my January wrap-up, I go into that just a little bit. So, but if you love Dresden, maybe skip that because I rant a little bit. All right, Shards of a Broken Crown, Raymond E. Feist. This is a truly outstanding ending of Serpent War Saga. In many ways, this book is remarkable because this book is the falling action of what happened in the third book. But I found it very real because if you think about it, especially if you have a conflict that takes place across the world or even just a continent, yes, you may win the big battle, but there's still little battles. There's still a lot of things that have to happen for everything to truly be done. And he leads into that. And the only way that it would work is if you could pace it really well. And that's what I thought he did so very, very well here, is just the pacing of this book, which was almost entirely falling action, worked really, really well. But then about halfway through, he reminded you that there's one aspect of the story that wasn't done yet. So you get a lot of falling action interweaved with this last kind of aspect of the story that had yet to be resolved that you may have forgotten about. And it was a really strong conclusion to that series. Again, Serpent War Saga is fantastic. All right, Sword of Kaigen, M.L. Wong. Let's go truly outstanding. Not quite best of the best tier for me, but I really enjoyed it. This is, of course, a book that was, I think it was originally self-pub and then it wasn't, I think, maybe. I don't remember, but I think of it as a self-published work. And I love the Eastern setting. I love the main character. When I talked about, actually the book right above it, when I talked about Sorcerer's Legacy, one of the things that I loved about that book was kind of the structural difference, the way it was structured. Sword of Kaigen is one of the most uniquely structured kind of standalone novels I'd read in quite some time. And I honestly wish that I hadn't been spoiled to the structure, so I'm not going to mention what it is, what makes it very different. But I enjoyed that aspect of it. A lot of people didn't like it because it wasn't structured like a typical book. But I really loved it. The last chapter is kind of clunky, to be honest. That's probably the reason why I can't put it top tier, as I think she was trying to tie this into another series of hers. But I really enjoyed it. Strong female protagonist. I love, she's one of those authors like a Stephen Erikson that she makes you care about a character without realizing you really care about a character. So that when something momentous happens, you almost feel like you've been gut punched and you've been, pulled through the ringer. And I felt that with this main character here. I didn't realize that I had connected so much with this character. So I really enjoyed Sword of Kaigen. Let me see when I read it. It was early in the year. Sword of Kaigen, I read that one in June. All right. Summer Night. Summer Night. That was the one about the fairies. Yeah, I like that one. Another Dresden Files book. Truly outstanding. I think it's the fourth book in the series, maybe? I think so. Yeah, I enjoyed the fairy world of that one. This one, I think the story itself is probably not as memorable to me as just the world building aspect of it. And I did enjoy kind of the summer court and the winter court. And there's a really memorable scene with non-spoiler with Harry and the Winter Queen. And let's just say she's tempting him, and his resolution just made me just guffaw out loud. Anyway, Summer Night is one of the stronger ones in the Dresden Files so far. Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England, Brandon Sanderson. Good to great. This one's not mid. I thought it would be mid going in because people didn't like it as much, but maybe with lower expectations, I kind of enjoyed this one. I forgot to tell you when I read Summer Night. Let me find that. Summer Night, I read that one in February. Yeah, fourth book. So that was earlier in the series. Frugal Wizard's Guide. When did I read that one? Read that one in June. And I mean, it's not the best Sanderson, but it's still very good. I think the one thing about that author, love him or hate him, he's consistent. And I think because he does plot his work so well that you usually get a pretty satisfying ending. And I love the ending of this book. And I thought the artwork in this one really elevated the story tremendously. So a pretty good book there. Lesser Devil by Christopher Rocchio. This is another good to great one. This is a novella in the Sun Eater world, and this follows Hadrian's brother. And I thought it was overly long, but I enjoyed the kind of the you get to see bigger picture of the universe. And I hope that that's what I'm going to get a lot more of in the novellas and short stories that you're going to get with the other works of Rocchio to kind of fill in some of the gaps of the universe in Sun Eater. So I enjoyed Lesser Devil. I read that one. I know when I read that one. I read that one in November. All right, let's do one more and that'll check the chat. Firefly Life Signs. This one's kind of mid. I don't like this specific author's take on the Firefly books because I don't feel he writes the female characters very well. And so Life Signs was not one that was one of the better ones. I think there's some other Firefly books in here that'll be higher. Yeah, there's two others that are going to be higher than this one. But I mean, I love Firefly. I love the universe. These Firefly books are kind of my guilty pleasures as a reader. They're very short. They're very quick reads, kind of the palate cleanser type. It's always fun to just revisit the Crew of the Serenity. If you're like me and, you know, a Shiny fan or a brown coat fan, you'll enjoy probably most of these, even though this one was kind of a lesser one for me. All right, let's go to the chat real quick. Let's see. Fox is back. Death Mask is great. Yes, Philip, the marathon continues. I've been through 1 cup of coffee and about half a glass of water. Hopefully I make it through and my voice makes it through. I'm down to 2 rows, so we're getting there. You forgive me for my thanks, Josh. You forgive me for my Dresden comments coming next week. Yes, I have some issues with Proven Guilty that I'll mention. Kathy, I'll have to skip the wrap up. We talked about it a little bit on the fireside. Let's see. Brian, one time you hear the word guffaw this week. True. Frugal tongue twister. Agreed. Okay. All right. Back to the ranking. Where are we? Lonesome Crown, book 3 of the Brian Lee Durfee series, 5 Warrior Angels. Lonesome Crown is great. I call it a beautiful mess because I want to be perfectly honest. I think that Durfee's editor didn't do a great job because there are times in this story where a character has dialogue where they're on the other side of the continent. There are numerous things in here that are errors in the book, but I kind of just had to overlook those because I did really enjoy the series as a whole. And the third book, the thing that I remember most, but even though I'm probably going to put the other 2 in the upper tier, the thing I remember most about the series and love most about this series is there are 3 epilogues at the end that might be my favorite epilogues of anything I've read in fantasy, because he ties in a lot of the themes he's talking about and just blew me away. I loved the epilogues. And of course you have to read about 3,000 pages to get there. So the last book, I mean, it's a little bit exhausting. The final battle is like 150 pages and it's just balls to the wall and it's bonkers and it's crazy, but it's beautiful too. So Lonesome Crown, I enjoy the 5 Warrior Angels. Again, I think Durfee's editor gave him a bad service here. I think he could have trimmed some of this as well. I don't know what happened with that with Simon & Schuster's Saga Press, but I did enjoy the series. I know I read this one in March because we started last year about this and did talk about it. So I did enjoy Lonesome Crown. All right, Prince of Thorns, first book of the Broken Empire series. I did not like the beginning of this series. I almost didn't continue the series. I hated the main character. I knew that going in. But even more than that, I felt that the main character was not realistic. And then there's kind of a magical reason that he's unrealistic at the end, but I thought it was kind of a cop-out, to be honest. But I liked the ending of this book, and I liked the writing enough to continue, which I'm glad, because I did overall have a favorable kind of overall feeling about this series. And again, enough to read more in the world. Red Queen's War, I have all 3 books on my physical TBR. I'll read those soon. But I thought it was a really, really rocky start to the series as a whole. I read Prince of Thorns in, let's check. Prince of Thorns, I read that one in May. So, all right. Mystic River is top tier Lehane. I know Colton on the Discord just read it and kind of blew him away. Everyone's been talking about it this morning. It's one of Lehane's best. He already has 3 in the top tier, and I'm not done because he wrote some of the best books I read this year. Mystic River is a standalone, and it has to deal with 3 boys playing in the street, and one is abducted. And then years later, the repercussions of that act come together. It's a beautiful book. One of the things about this one, I think it's some of Lehane's best characterization, especially the secondary characters. You understand the motivation so well, and you just see kind of how this act, which was so impactful to these kids, it affected more than just the kids in the story. Really, really great book. Fantastic standalone by Lehane. Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin, truly outstanding. And this, honestly, this made me mad a little bit because this book has no right to be as good as it is because it's written in a very historic manner and it's still riveting. I loved almost this whole book. I felt maybe the last couple chapters were not as good as the Dance of Dragons section before it. But man, this book has no right to be as good as it is. It's about 100 years, I think, of the Targaryen history set before A Song of Ice and Fire. And it honestly, again, it shouldn't be as good as it is, but it just shows how good an author this is. And it makes me mad because I don't know how much he's writing, to be honest. I don't know if we'll ever get Winds of Winter. Let's see. I didn't tell you when I read the last 2 books. Mystic River was in July. Fire and Blood was in August. So those are some summer reads for me. All right, Forgetting Moon, Brian Lee Durfee, first book of the 5 Warrior Angels, truly outstanding. What's interesting right now for me is that I'm right now reading Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. And having read it after reading Durfee's book, it's so obvious that many aspects of his book are a love letter to that series, which if you know Durfee's great booktube channel, he talks about that series a lot, and you can tell there's a lot of kind of hat tips to that series in this one. But I really enjoyed the first book of the series, The Forgetting Moon. Really, really great. I read that one in January. All right, King of Thorns, second book of Broken Empire. This is my favorite of the series. I really enjoyed the second book quite a bit, King of Thorns. I thought that in many ways it almost just pushed past the things I didn't like about the first book, and it told a really great story, self-contained. You'll never like the main character, but I do like that there's kind of an arc to him in this story, and there's kind of 2 different storylines going on that I thought came together very well. This was my favorite of the 3 now that they're all up on the screen. You see they're all on different tiers, but King of Thorns, the second book, was my favorite. I read that one in June. All right, Midnight in Broad Daylight. This was my nonfiction book of the year, so it definitely needs to be top tier for me. This is Japanese-American family dealing with kind of starting in the Great Depression, and half of the family has to move back to Japan, and half of them move back to Hiroshima. So you can kind of see where the story goes when World War II hits. We get half of the families in America, half the families in Japan. Of course, it deals with some of the Japanese internment camps. It deals with some of the Japanese Americans back in Japan dealing with kind of their people in Japan just not liking that they have the stink of America on them, to quote the book. It's a really, really great book and was my nonfiction book of the year. So top tier read for me by Pamela Rotner Sakamoto. When did I read that one? I read that one in April. And I had been actually in Hiroshima and had stood on the bridge where the bomb had exploded above, because it exploded in the atmosphere. So it had double meaning for me, having been to the Peace Museum and so forth. But fantastic work by Sakamoto. Another top tier book, Deadbeat, Jim Butcher. Easily my favorite of the Dresden Files so far. This is the book that for me put the series over the hump, where I know I'm going to finish it now. I was still enjoying it leading up to this point. Some of the books I think were better than others, but Deadbeat was the first one where I was like, yes, this is a great book, where everything that is building up kind of came to a head, and I love this book. It didn't quite make my finals for book of the year, but it was probably a top 10 book, and it did make my new favorites video. So I did enjoy that one tremendously. All right. One I did not like tremendously is actually Guy Gin, and I'm going to do this. I think that Guy Gin is a skip it for a couple reasons. Number one, Clavell had planned a sequel and passed away, was not able to finish the sequel. So this huge book, like 1,100 pages, doesn't end. I mean, there's an ending, but there's a lot more story here. And that's probably the biggest reason why I put in the skip it. But also, I felt it was a lot slower. It was a bit of a letdown from Taipan, which was another truly outstanding book by Clavell. I loved being back in Japan, and I love seeing kind of some of the echoes of Shogun in there. And I love that it was set after Taipan, so you saw some of the characters there. But as a whole, just excuse me, just didn't quite work for me as well as some others, and it was a bit of a disappointment for me. All right, Sacred by Lehane. Not one of Lehane's best. In fact, probably one of the lower rated Lehane's, but Lehane's still at least good. This is the third book in the Kenzin Gennaro series, and I thought it was a good installment, not a great installment. It was more on the crime thriller side of things, maybe not as gritty and real as some of his other works. It did go over the top a little bit, and some people love that. I mean, his crime thrillers are higher rated on Goodreads than kind of his more literary works. But for me, not top tier Lehane, not truly outstanding either, but still very good book, which I read in August. All right, Empire of Silence, Christopher Rocchio. I talked about a little bit of this when I talked about Howling Dark, first book of the Sunnier series. I was hooked right away. I read this really big book very quickly. And I was told by a lot of people that if I liked this book, it boded well for the series, and I see why. Because I think on every objective level, Howling Dark was a better story, better execution of Empire of Silence, which frankly bounced around a little bit. Maybe because of the coming-of-age nature of the story. But I really liked it. I liked the world. Once I got into the writing, I liked that aspect of it and enjoyed the story. I mean, I felt I was hooked right away. So it's truly, truly an outstanding read, which I know I read that one in October. All right, The Ancient Gate by R.S. Penny. This is a self-published work that unfortunately I'm putting the skip it here. It had two very compelling female protagonists, but I think what this book was doing, I don't know how it got sent to me. I don't know if the author sent it to me or a publicist or whatever. But I think he was trying to marry two different series together. And like one of the main characters, the story was not very interesting. The other one was. And then they kind of bounced back and forth in characters, and kind of a book that was very, very disjunct for me. But it's a self-published book, but there wasn't enough for me to really latch on to the story. I read this one. When did I read this one? It was in the summer, I remember. It was in June. Yeah. All right, David Gemmell, In the Realm of the Wolf. This is the one that is another one truly outstanding. This is actually one had the beautiful title in the UK as Waylander 2, because it followed Waylander, which was my favorite. Is Waylander down here somewhere? I don't remember. Yep, there it is. I'm going to talk about that one last, so I won't give it away. But this is a sequel to Waylander. This is the 5th or 6th book. Hold on, let me look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the 5th book of the Drenai saga, and I really enjoyed it. It's a great kind of revisitation of a character that you met in the 3rd book in the series. I love these David Gemmell books. They read very quickly, but there's still a great bit of depth in there, and truly enjoy them. All right, let me hop back on the chat, see if there's anything else in there I want to talk about. Let's see. Where was I? Heidi, Frugal Wizard, skip it. Yeah, I won't argue with you there. Hey, thanks for hanging out, Kathy. Heidi, how do I like female characters in Sun Eater? So far, honestly, there's not enough depth in them for me to be able to talk about them with any great specificity. Tad Pinkston, found my channel this year. Blast finding really good booktubers. I don't know if I'm really good, but thanks for hanging out and finding the channel. Heidi agrees with my not mess assessment. I mean, Heidi, didn't you love the epilogues though? Man, they're so good. Yes, Lehane and GGK IVT, definitely. Hey, Andy's here. Hey, your books are next. So where are they going to go? We shall see. So Given Day, top spot. So Andy, I'm not ranking these left to right because that'll add even more, but it was my number 2 book of the year. What did I say about Night Shift? It's amazing. Yeah, so let's see. 1,100 pages without an ending is inexcusable. Looking at you, Sanderson. Oh, shade. Love it. 4 Denis Lehanes in the S tier. I need to get there. There's going to be at least one more. What should you start with for Lehane? Start at the beginning. I would say that probably A Drink Before the War, even though it's just in the truly outstanding tier, is great. So, all right. Back to the tier ranking. We're down to almost 2 rows. So he's in the chat now. So what do I say about the Crimes of Rooker Flynn? Crimes of Rooker Flynn is truly outstanding start to a book series. This is kind of a follow-up to his Legend of Black Jack, which was a really enjoyable book that was a BookTube darling 2 years ago, I think, when it came out. And this is his follow-up trilogy. And full disclosure, I'm an alpha reader for the author, and I love that he puts his trust in me to read his books before they're ready for publication. But Crimes of Rooker Flynn follows a different character, although it does end up having 2 protagonists, and that's all I'm going to say because I am very spoiler adverse, even though, you know, a lot of people know who the second protagonist is. But Crimes of Rooker Flynn's a bit darker trilogy here, and it's a prison tale. You get Rooker Flynn, this kind of pirate, and he's a rogue, but he's kind of lovable, except sometimes he isn't. And he's a very complex character that I enjoyed. And I love the world of Keymark that Andy has painted here. And The Crimes of Rooker Flynn is the beginning of that story. Trial, because again, I'm always honest, I put it maybe a little bit below the Crimes. It's definitely in the great tier of the good to great. And it's the second book. First book ends in a cliffhanger, literally and figuratively. And then the second book picks up right where you left off and continues from there. I did feel that the second book brought a lot of things together, and I really love the ending. It's one of those that if you read this now, because the third book's not out yet, the third book is great. I can tell you that, but it's not out yet. So if you want to read these now, you're going to wait. I don't know, Andy, you can tell us in the chat when the third book's going to be out. But having been an alpha reader, I can tell you that the third book is easily my favorite in the trilogy. So even if I put Trial in the good to great tier, he sticks the landing for this. I mean, there are all the feels and everything that you would expect from a finish of a book series. And I know my other alpha readers enjoyed it just as much as me. So when that one comes out, it'll be on next year's tier list if I do this again. Although my voice right now is not liking this. So let's keep going. Oh, when did I read those books and review those books? Hold on, let me give you that. Crimes of Rooker Flynn, I read in July. So that was in the July reads. And then The Trial of Rooker Flynn, I think it was December, if I remember correctly. Yes, it was. It was my 98th book of the year. All right, Firefly Carnival. This is truly outstanding. The other 2 Firefly books that I read this year, again, my guilty pleasures. This one was my favorite. It is by Uma McCormack, I believe is the author's name. Let me check that for sure. It's too small on my screen to see. Hold on. 99 books. It's hard to scroll. Firefly Carnival. Yeah, Uma McCormack is the author. And I thought that she just absolutely nailed the characters. Just 100% nailed the characters. And I had been told before this, she's written in a lot of different universes, like I think Star Trek and some others. And she just understood, especially after kind of the other author that I think didn't understand the female characters. Firefly Carnival has POVs from every single main character, the Serenity, and I thought she encompassed all of them very well. I think the one character who's very elusive and hard to write is River, and I just thought she nailed it. So I'm happy that she's written at least one more book in this Firefly series, and I'll definitely read more of that too. Alter My Fate by Michael R. Schulteis. I always have trouble saying that, the R's and the L's. But Alter My Fate was a really great start to the Rostoval saga. It's very much sword and sorcery, but what made it different for me is that the sword and sorcery, the Alter My Fate, was set in kind of almost a Middle Eastern setting. So that made it feel a lot different from kind of a lot of books out there that are going to make it feel more like, Conan clones, because Cimmeria feels, even in the desert settings, feels a bit more familiar than what you got here in the Alter My Fate, with these tribes and kind of the tribal aspect, and kind of the honor feels a bit different. Really great first book of the series, which I will continue. I guess I forgot when to mention the last 2 books when I read them. If you want to check out I'm doing that. If you're new to the video here, I'm doing that because I'm trying to be quick, even though an hour 45 minutes in here, I'm not real quick, but so that this doesn't last 5 hours, I'm telling you what month I read all these books. So if you do want to explore deeper thoughts, like 2 to 3 minutes about each book, you can check out my monthly wrap-ups. But Firefly Carnival I read in August, and The Altar of My Fate I read in August as well. So you can see me talk about those in the same video. All right, The Lays of Beleriand by J.R.R. Tolkien and Christopher Tolkien. Sorry to put Tolkien as mid, but these are honestly, these history of Middle-earth books are frankly only for people like me that are completionists, because they're very dry. They're very historical, but I did enjoy a lot of The Lays of Beleriand, and I read that one in, let's see, I read that one in June. So, this one, it's important to know on this one, though, just remember the lays. These are all narrative poems. So if you don't like poetry, this one probably is going to be in the skip it tier for you. I struggle with poetry, but I push through it at times. And I'm glad I pushed through this one, because the ones where I was able to connect and understand what was going on, I did enjoy quite a bit. All right, unfortunately, another self-pub skip it here is The Saga of Bjorn Unfrid. This is by John Simons is the author name. This is I remember this one. This was the last book of the year. So this is December. This one was a 150-page book, and it had like 60 chapters or something. And I really struggled with these super, super short chapters. It's just not my kind of storytelling, because it jumped around quite a bit. Had a lot of promise, because it was a sagas, the Norse sagas kind of set with a character set at the University of Houston. So kind of a Texas setting. So I thought I was going to love this. And there were parts I was really enjoying it, but I would really enjoy a chapter that was 5 pages long, and then it would skip to something else. So unfortunately that goes into the skip it there. All right. Tagana by Guy Gavriel Kay. Tagana is truly outstanding. I honestly, though, for me, I've read 10 books by this author at this point. Tagana is not top tier K for me. So I don't know why it's the most famous. Maybe because it's the first one that was not in his series. It was the first of these historical novels. And when I say it's not my favorite, it's truly outstanding. Look at its peers. It's up here with Guards. It's up here with some Fire and Blood. It's up here with some really great books. But it's not top tier K for me. I think it's amazing, and I love it, and I look forward to rereading it. But it's maybe 7th or 8th favorite of my 10 that I've read by Kay. Definitely read it. It's just that my love for this author knows no bounds at this point. But Tagana is truly outstanding. I read it early in the year. Let's see when that was. I won't go so far as call it mid-Ghana like Kyle calls it, but yeah, I read it in April. So it's really great, but not the one that everyone should start with, really. So I see people that always want to start with Tagana. I don't think so. New York Minute. New York Minute was self-published work by, I don't know if it's Stephen Arian. I've heard it pronounced Orion as well. This was interesting because this is kind of a fantasy noir book. And I put it in the good to great tier, and I think that's exactly where it belongs. I love the world building. Kind of a detective tale, but they have swords instead of guns, and it feels like it's in like a New York. It is in a New York City, but it feels like it's in the modern setting, but it's swords and everything. I love the world building aspects of it. I think he has some future novellas planned. The reason this one wasn't higher for me is I felt that there was kind of one plot twist too far. And I know that the ratings for this book have been a lot higher than my personal reception for the book, but I think maybe that is because I do read a lot more crime fiction than the typical fantasy reader. But I think it's still very good, and I do want to read more because I just enjoyed kind of the juxtaposition of this New York City with swords and magic and things like that, but still skyscrapers and things like that. So I do want to read more of that. I read New York Minute in... When did I read that? New York Minute I read in September. All right, let's do a couple more and then I'll check the chat. Firefly, What Makes Us Mighty. This is a good to great installment in the series. This is another one where I thought the author understood the characters very, very well. This is the latest one that I've read in the series. And I read this one in November. So I think this is not a truly outstanding one because I think the story is almost ripped from one of the stories in the series, but it actually made it feel like another Firefly episode. So it worked very, very well. World Gone By, Denis Lehane. Trying to scroll this because this is top tier Lehane. Yeah, he's up there a lot, but he's that good. World Gone By is the third of the Coughlin novels. This is the novel that Stephen King called the greatest gangster novel since The Godfather, and it's so good. It's a shorter book compared to the three. The three books kind of get shorter as you go through them. And what I like about this one is this follows the criminal that you saw in Live by Night, and he's still in the mob family, and he's seeing that what his life has become and dealing with kind of the repercussions of being a criminal his entire life. And it starts to come to a head. Probably can't read it by itself. You probably at least need to read Live by Night, which is in the truly outstanding tier, I think. I can't find it at the moment, but yeah, there it is. It's right here. So it's really, really great. Again, StoryTube just did a video about these books. I did one back in January or March. I read World Gone By in January. I remember that one because it was such an outstanding start of the year. All right, let's do a couple more and then I will continue, check the chat and then knock out the rest. So No Gods, No Monsters, Cadwell Turnbull. This was kind of mid for me. I see the appeal. I liked the ideas for this, but it's kind of a literary fantasy and it was kind of a literary darling this year, but I don't know. It just didn't add up for me when I got to the end of this one. It's been a while. I read this one in June. It was one of those where, let me look at my review just to remember. Oh yeah. So this is the one the monsters were stand-ins for. It was using monsters to kind of talk about marginalized aspects of our society. So I loved it thematically, but I didn't feel the author pulled it off, to be honest. It was one of those where the ideas were grand, but the execution fell flat for me. But your mileage may vary. I remember someone in the Discord saying it was their book of the year. So a lot of people like this one a lot more than me. It's one of those books where BookTube, where Goodreads, I think the ratings are like a 3.6 or 7, where you get a lot of like 2 and 3 star ratings and a lot of 5-star ratings. So your mileage may vary, as I've said before. All right, Prince, The Beautiful Ones. This isn't really a book. It's a coffee table book. Prince was writing a book when he died. And he got about 25 pages done. And then they decided to publish this and then publish pictures and handwritten song lyrics and all this. So, I mean, it's hard to even call it a book. It's more of a coffee table book. But I've always loved the author as the author. I've always loved the artist Prince. As an author, there's not enough here to really evaluate. So I'm just going to put it in the mid tier. All right, let's do one more. I don't know if he's still in the chat, but The Way of Edan was one of my favorite rereads this year. I reread it via audio, and it's a truly outstanding book. It's a truly outstanding series. It does end well. My favorite was actually the third book in the series. If you haven't read this series by Philip Chase, it's definitely worth your time. Right up there with not just some of the favorites, self-published works that I've read in recent times, but some of the best fantasy works I've read in recent times. I did the reread so soon after reading the book, because 2 years ago, this was my favorite self-published book of the year, or series of the year. And I did the reread because Alan from Library of Alexandria did the audiobook, and he was awesome, as I expected him to be. And The Way of Edan was truly outstanding book for this year. All right, I'm going to look at the chat one more time before I knock out these last few books. All right, to see where I was. Okay, good. I haven't missed too much there. Andy, the Conan books, those are Robert Jordan's, not Robert Howard's. Robert E. Howard's. Yeah, the Conan books by Robert Jordan, because of his writing style, does elevate them. Okay. All right. Janny agrees with my Way of Edan. Andy doesn't agree with my King Rat, but it's all good. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to knock out these last few here and then kind of give a summation here. So back to Brightness Long Ago. If you've been paying attention, this was my best book of the year. So I might as well put it top left. Brightness Long Ago. Again, I'm repeating myself on this one, but when I finished A Brightness Long Ago and I finished the book, I closed the book and I just said, that was beautiful. It's a truly, truly beautiful book. One of Kay's best. A Song for Our Bond remains my favorite, but this one might be number 2. It's such a remarkable story. I think someone I wish I remember who I was talking to. Someone told me that they don't think it's top tier K because it's not long enough. But I think that's oftentimes a great thing if you feel a book is too short. But Brightness Long Ago, one of Guy Gavriel Kay's best works. It centers around kind of a time in the inspiration is the time in history where you have these Italian city-states and mercenary groups. And again, like some of Kay's best works, the main characters are not the main players in the story. It has a great female protagonist as one of the main protagonists. It has a great everybody character as one of the other protagonists. It's just beautiful. Go read it. So good. It's essentially a standalone, although All the Seas of the World acts as kind of a sequel. I'll talk about that next. I've read that in January. Talk about that in my monthly wrap-up next week as well. But Brightness is just simply beautiful. Oh, one top tier after another. Memories of Ice. Yeah, that's definitely best of the best. Memories of Ice is outstanding. I have a vlog called From DNF to 5-Star Reads. So that was Memories of Ice for me. I was originally reading this when I had a very busy time at work, a lot of late nights, and I DNF'd it because I didn't have the mental capacity to read this book. So I was glad over a year later, I picked it back up because it was outstanding. Just truly great book. Now I can say, since I've read 4 of the books of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, 3 of the 4 are best of the best here in my mind. As for when I read the last 2 books, Brightness Long Ago was in November. Memories of Ice, I read this summer. It was June or July. I read that one in July. All right, moving right along. Roll Red Roll is a difficult book to read. It's good to great. It was a nonfiction book of the year for me. This is about a sexual assault of a high school student by members of a celebrated football team. And the reason that I read this is this actually happened in my hometown. So I kind of felt obligated to read this book, but I thought it was very, very well done. There's actually a documentary on Netflix you can read, but the book has a lot more depth and a lot more nuance to the story. So not for the faint of heart, but it is a very, very good book. I thought it was very well written. I think a lot of times when you have a filmmaker that writes a book, they may not be as skilled and it may feel disjunct, but I felt the storytelling was solid from beginning to end. I read Roll Red Roll in June. All right, Shaping of Middle-earth by J.R.R. Tolkien. Again, only for the completionist. Shaping of Middle-earth. It wasn't it wasn't narrative poem, so it was narrative prose, which was nice. I read this one in, as I push to the end here. We're almost there, ladies and gentlemen. Shaping of Middle-earth, I read in October. Civil War. This is a nonfiction book. This is truly outstanding work of narrative nonfiction. Shelby Foote, if you've seen Ken Burns' amazing documentary about the American Civil War, there's a historian with a deep Mississippi drawl that talks very slowly, but has the best stories in that documentary. That's Shelby Foote. He wrote a 3-volume history of the Civil War, and it's a narrative history. This is the first volume, and it's thick. I mean, I read it like 300 pages at a time because it's thick and it's a bit dense. But if you love this time of history, which I do, it's one of my favorite historic eras. I think it's a must read. I'll probably get to volume 2 this year, but it's fantastic. I have a great box set that a viewer sent me, which was just so kind of them to send that to me. But Shelby Foote's Civil War is fantastic. If you're into that kind of thing, I read that back in September. All right, 6 to go. What do we got here? Three Musketeers. Ooh, that's tough. I'm going to go truly outstanding. I almost put it best of the best. It's up there. I really enjoyed this. What I liked most is Count of Monte Cristo is one of my favorite books of all time. I'm still counting down my top 50. I haven't talked about it yet, and I'm up to 21. So, it's up there. And this felt very different, and I like that aspect of it. And unlike, I talked about Dickens earlier, he's a tier below that one. Oh, he's right below. Look at that. No, that's Steinbeck. Where is he? Here's the Dickens. He's in the good to great. Unlike some other works of the 19th century, I feel like Dumas doesn't have the fat that some other of his contemporaries, like Dickens, like Victor Hugo, where there are just chapters that I feel could be cut. I didn't feel that with this one. I didn't love some of the characters. I mean, some of the aspects of the story, honestly, they don't age very well, but I still enjoyed the story. I thought it was great storytelling and definitely enjoyed it. All right, Dragonlance, Love and War. So this one wasn't as bad as Kender, Gully Dwarves and Gnomes. This was the 3rd volume of the Dragonlance Tales series, but it's kind of mid. It's some short story collections, but there were some really good ones in there. Let me see if I can pull that up. I can tell you who the authors were to just give them credit for that. Dragonlance Volume 3. So there were short stories by Harold Baxt and Michael Williams that I enjoyed, and my favorite was one called A Painter's Vision by Barbara Siegel and Scott Siegel. So those were some really great stories within. A bit uneven. I read that one in July. Three Musketeers, I don't think I told you when I read that one. The Three Musketeers, I read that one in, getting there. That was in May. All right, 4 to go. Shadow of a Dark Queen. This is the first book of the Serpent War saga, and it was very, very good. Very good start to the story. It follows kind of one character that is the main character in this book, and then is still kind of a main character because that's how he structured this 4-book series. And I thought it was a really, really great start to that series. Shadow of a Dark Queen. I read that, I think in September, maybe. Let me look back. Yes. Yeah, that was in September. 3 to go. Michael Moorcock, Stormbringer. This is just representing the book, and I think that's best of the best. That was my favorite. I've read 8 by Moorcock in the Elric saga, the 2 omnibus editions that Saga Press has put out recently. And Stormbringer is my favorite, even though it was the first novel he wrote. A lot of the other later novels were written later, or they were kind of the fix-up novels that happens a lot where they take short stories and put them together. But the stakes couldn't have been higher in this story. And what's interesting is a lot of the things that happened in the earlier novels in the chronology, which were written later, had repercussions in this book. So it's just interesting from a creative standpoint how this novel came first as a novel, even though some of the short stories came before that, and how it all, reading it later in chronological order, it worked so well. So tip my hat to that. I really like the darker kind of stories that Moorcock told in Stormbringer, and it was my favorite of all of them. All right, Blackest Heart by Brian Lee Durfee. I guess we got a third row of truly outstanding going now. And that was the second book. That was probably my favorite of the 3 books in the 5 Warrior Angels. I did enjoy that one quite a bit. I liked some of the POVs that we got in that book and how some of the stories evolved in that story. I read Stormbringer in February, and I read The Blackest Heart in February as well. All right, last one. I can't bring it all the way to the top tier, so I need to do a step along the way. Waylander. This is my favorite book by David Gemmell. This is the 3rd book of the Drenai saga. Waylander is a fantastic story that follows a character named Waylander. And what I love most about this character's story is that it's a story of self-discovery for himself, where he is one of those characters where he makes decisions all the time, but he doesn't know why he makes certain decisions, and he becomes more conscious about himself. It's a big story that spans kind of the whole Drenai saga world, and I just really loved it. So there's my year. Look at all that. So best of the best, we have 14 books that I put S tier. So I think that's great. Looks like it's about 30 in the truly outstanding, like 25 good to great. Got about 10 mids and just like 6 skip-its. So pretty solid year. Again, if you just got here, the top tier, none of these are ranked, but these are my top 2 books of the year, Brightness Long Ago and The Given Day. Just a cut above everything else, just barely. I can probably give you my top 6 pretty easily. Not in order necessarily, but I remember my finalists. If you saw the Red Fury Book Awards, those 6 left to right were the finalists for my book of the year. So I did that. I'm not going to rearrange anything else here because, again, this is a tier ranking, not a ranking 1 to 99. And we've been at this for 2 hours. So I'm going to unshare the screen. If anyone's still here, we can chat a little bit longer, and then I'll go and have some lunch. So stop sharing. Back to this. Here we go. All right. So we're back to the chat here. So I can put some of these on the thing here. Yes, definitely Way of Edan was great. Kay's Brightness Long Ago closes the gap with the peak Lions of Alrazon. Yes, Lions is amazing. Yes, I've read Lions, and it's top tier K for sure. Oh, Andy, I'm going to say I hope you love it, but I know you'll love it, so I don't have to tell you that. About to start Malazan. Best of luck. Just be patient. Memories of Ice destroyed all the tissues I had. The ending. There's a moment in my vlog, if you go watch that. I think it's mostly spoiler free, but there's a moment in the vlog where it's literally, I'm going to recreate it. There's a moment in the vlog where I look like this, where I'm staring out into space, trying to process what just happened to me. Because Memories of Ice, my goodness, the ending, he just hits you and hits you and hits you. And you think about these characters and you think about the things that they've done. I mean, just incredible book. Incredible book. Yes, I agree. I wish I could read all day. Retirement's kind of in sight for me, but it's going to be a while. Yeah, the review of Roll Red Roll. That was tough. I did a dedicated review for that one if you're interested in that. I did take notes with Gardens of the Moon, and I did take notes with Dead House Gates. And the first time through Memories of Ice, I took notes. But then I stopped when I reread Memories of Ice. And because it was starting to feel like homework, and that's one of the reasons I DNF'd Memories of Ice the second time. So it may work for you, it may not. At this point now, I just read them, and if I don't remember things, I'm okay with it. I mean, I'm okay with that in epic fantasy. It happens. I mean, I'm reading second book of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, and I was honest on the Discord the other day. I said, this character just appeared. I have no idea who they are. They were from the first book, and it was a kind of a side character that I didn't remember. And I'm okay. I don't like it to feel like homework. So a non-savage, if it works for you, awesome. For me, I just kind of roll with it. Dumas is very plot driven. I agree. Thank you, Andy. I appreciate you. Thanks for hanging out here. Yeah, Colton, definitely have to read both of those for sure. So, Jeff, you got to run. Yes, I enjoyed your book, and I appreciate you stopping by here, and I look forward to the second one. So some of you are still hanging out. So if you have any questions for me, I said this would be a 10K celebration. Feel free to throw things into the chat. If not, I'll just riff here a few more minutes and then go my own way. Start the rest of my day. Yeah, Janny, this was one of those. After I made this, the people spoke. I did a question of whether or not what you wanted me to do for a 10K celebration, and I put this up there. And then when it won, I was like, oh, do I really want to do this? So yeah, I do agree. Thanks, Anon. I appreciate it. What am I reading next? So I'm finishing up. I'll probably finish up tomorrow. Stone of Farewell, which is second book of Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. And so I guess that answers this one too. What am I reading today? I'm less than 200 pages away. So I'm going to finish that probably tomorrow night. Obviously there's the Super Bowl tonight, so I won't read tonight, but I'll read a little bit this afternoon. And then I'll probably finish that up tomorrow night. I'm traveling on Wednesday. I have a convention in San Antonio Wednesday through I get back Sunday morning. So what I'll be taking with me, which is, I guess, what am I reading next, is the short story collection, Tales of the Sun Eater, Volume 1 by Christopher Rocchio. Up after that, when I get back from the convention, is I'll be reading Emma by Jane Austen. So want to make sure I continue. I really loved Pride and Prejudice, and I've been wanting to read more of her. She's just a fantastic writer, and somebody told me that might be a good one that I enjoy. So yes, Janny, I wish they had just picked a live stream so I could just do this, because the tier ranking, again, it did take 2 hours. So yeah. Andy, I don't read during the Super Bowl. No, you can't even read during commercials because you have to watch the commercials to see if there's any good ones. So some years the commercials are better than the game. I don't know if that'll be the case this year, but yeah, in the game, the Super Bowl takes like 5 hours. So it's like starts at 5:30 Texas time and then goes all the way until like I go to bed. So unfortunately, that's the case right now. But yeah, Heidi is correct. I'm about 180 pages from the end of Stone of Farewell. So get that one. And we'll have a chat probably March 1st. I haven't confirmed with Ben and Matt and Kathy yet, but March 1st is open for me. And I wanted to do it on a Saturday this time because that's a little bit better. A little bit better for me and just my schedule. Saturdays usually a little bit better for Sundays to do that kind of thing. So March 1st, those of you that have read that book. Do I watch sports a lot or just the Super Bowl? I watch football quite a bit. I do love American football to be specific, since I have international viewers out there. I do love American football. I'm a lifelong Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I do love American football. I do love college as well. And I also like hockey. So I watch that a bit. I'll watch the other sports. Like I'll watch college football or college basketball during the tournaments. I'll usually watch NBA or Major League Baseball, usually during the playoffs. But for the most part, it's just those two. Got paid to reenact as a pirate on a Super Bowl midpoint slot store. Oh my. That's amazing. That's a story for sure. But yeah, I'm looking forward to, and then end of the month, just to talk about what I'll be reading the rest of the month. I'll be reading read by Kyle, Children of Earth and Sky by Guy Gavriel Kay. So that'll be my 11th Kay book. And then I have penciled in to do Fiona Var in April and May, and his new book in May. So by the time his new book comes out, I'll have read everything but Isabel. So I'm pretty excited about that. So again, an author that, if you saw my new favorites video, I asked myself if Guy Gavriel Kay is my favorite author of all time, even above Stephen King. And I don't know. I want to finish all of his books, give myself some time before I answer that. But I will say that he's a top 3 for me. Andy asked, do I feel more excitement or responsibility with hitting 10K, or is it just another milestone? I mean, I'm excited anytime I hit a milestone because my channel was tiny for so long. I mean, listen to these stats. And like when I see a small channel talk about how their channel's growing, I just laugh. So I have it here. It took me 10 months to hit 100 subscribers. It took me 21 months to hit 1,000. So I don't take any of this for granted. Once I hit 1,000, it grew pretty steadily, and it's grown pretty well since then. And for me, I'm just very appreciative. And that's why, especially when I see smaller channels, I always try to help out any smaller channels, because I know the early stages are the toughest. But one thing about 10K is that I know that, like, I'm never going to hit 50K. So kind of the milestones are done. So in many ways, I feel it's almost freeing, because I feel that with 10,000 subscribers, I do have kind of an audience that people do like what I do here on BookTube, that I feel in many ways, maybe I can be a little bit more, not adventurous, but maybe do a few different things and not have to worry about if someone's going to watch a video or not, because there is kind of an inherent built-in audience at this point. So I guess in many ways it's a bit freeing. Like I'm going to go back to doing a bit more lives. One reason is I'm paying for StreamYard again, and it's ridiculously expensive now. So I feel obligated to do those. So I'll probably be doing at least a live once a month, if not 2, just to kind of justify that purchase. So I guess it's not excitement or responsibility. I guess it's more excitement than responsibility. I think because there are enough viewers on the channel now that maybe if I do things differently, they'll maybe follow me in different creative outlets. I guess we shall see. So any reading project this year? Not really. I mean, I have some goals of things I want to read. I do have a really fun collaboration video planned. I haven't talked to the people yet, so I won't mention it, for when I do finish Guy Gavriel Kay's works. But I do have a fun video plan for that I'm excited to put together, because I love that author so much, and I do want to do a collab, and I don't feel that maybe just me talking about my own tier ranking will be as valuable as bringing some others into the mix. But yes, of course, sir. Fiona Var shines. If you read the mythology he wove into the tale, all Tolkien predecessors. Oh, that's interesting. You're suggested to read Fire and Blood before the main series. I disagree. I don't think so, because I think the main series is so good. I think that starting with the Game of Thrones is definitely the way to go. And Fire and Blood is written more as a historical narrative. So it's, even though it's, as I mentioned, better than it obviously should be, it's not as good as A Song of Ice and Fire. So I would definitely start there. Yeah, Heidi agrees with me there. Yeah, Andy, this is exactly it. 10K's kind of finish line for aspiration, frees me up to be whatever you like, because yeah, 10,000 or 12,000 don't seem as different as like 8,000 or 10,000. So I'm not really worried about that. It's interesting because when I was getting close to 10,000, I would open up the YouTube Studio app on my phone almost every day to see how close I was. And since I hit 10, I honestly don't think I've opened it. So yeah, I almost feel like I've gotten to, the channel will still grow, but I've almost gotten to kind of the biggest threshold that I feel that I'll get, unless I make that a goal. And it was never a goal channel growth was never a goal for me. I know some channels, you know, they want to grow and they want to build community and all that. For me, this whole thing was just a creative outlet. In the pandemic, I didn't have music as an outlet. You know, I could still practice. I could play my piano. I could play my trumpet, but I couldn't make music with people. I couldn't step in front of a group. And I just felt a creative void in my life. And that's where all this started. So, that's why I've continued. And I've loved the community that's built around it, but that was not my initial goal because frankly, I didn't know those things existed. I just thought I'd, you know, make a few videos, couple of my friends might watch it, couple family members might watch, and then that would be it. So the goal for me was never growth. And the fact that it just kind of organically happened and people liked whatever I was saying for whatever reason, it's gratifying to me. So that's kind of where I am with it. Rogue, yeah, I've put those last purposely because of that, especially Isabel. It seems to be the one that most people don't enjoy as much. Fiona of War seems to be mixed. It seems like there are a lot of people that love it. I think about the Sarantine mosaic and how mosaic is very deliberate in the naming, and I would guess that Fiona of War tapestry, I think that is probably very deliberate as well. So I think I'm going in with a different idea of this being kind of a different kind of trilogy. But I mean, the guy's done no wrong so far. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. And I have one clip. I forget which video. I do have one clip of me playing some Louis Armstrong on the channel. I'll have to find that, remember where that is. But Rogue, Long Price Quartet. Yes, I am reading that with John from Talking Story, probably in the second half of the year. We said mid-year, but looking at my own TBR, I think we're both kind of busy. So probably second half of the year, we're going to read that together. We've already, you know, talked about doing a live stream or two with Alan because he's the Long Price Prophet. And I'm really looking forward to that series. It seems like everybody, I know Brian just finished it and just raved about it. I think he just finished yesterday. So that one's one I'm looking forward to. And I'm also loving that it's kind of concise. I mean, it's kind of refreshing. I mean, we all love epic fantasy fans. We love our chunkers, but it's refreshing to sometimes have some more concise kind of high fantasy storytelling. So I'm looking forward to that. Hey, Mac. Yes, you agree with R.C. Clarke as the writer. Yeah, absolutely. Heidi, yes, I am going to reboot Brunch and Book Talk. I'm going to start one of those in March. I have 2 weekends in March that I don't know what I'm going to put out. So I'm going to kind of once per quarter, not have a video, but do a Brunch and Book Talk on a Saturday or a Sunday based on my guests. So I will be putting that together. So Janie, Fiona versus top tier, you have to see past the assumption he was drawing from Tolkien. He was not. He drew from the roots of fantasy. And that'll be fascinating. I'm not as well read before that. So maybe I need to squeeze some other things in there. I've read some Sword and Sorcery, but beyond that, not as much. No big Feist plans this year. The next one that I will read is the next series is kind of the series of standalones that Feist wrote with some others, which are the Legends of the Rift War, which I think there's like a Jimmy the Hand book in there and some others. I hope to get to those. They're not a priority this year because I'm as much as I love buying books and receiving books and things like that. I'm trying to be very conscious about reading the books I own because I have 96 unread books in my house. So I'm trying to do that. So there aren't any unread Feist books on hand. So I'm not sure if I'll get to him this year or not. Will I be doing monthly TBR polls for your 10K subs? Actually, so one thing I am going to do, Heidi. So what I'm going to start doing, I kind of sketch out my months. When I got to the end of January, I had time for one more book. So I did a poll on the Fireside Discord for that. The next time I get to the end of the month and I have room for another book, I'm going to do the same thing, but on the channel, on the community tab. So I will be going kind of back and forth for those. when I do have time. But right now I have so many things planned that it's hard to put in too many recommendations in there. Just because like I'm looking ahead and I have, I do a quarterly TBR, but looking ahead already what I have scheduled with like Malazan and Rockio and some buddy reads, I already have like 9 books of the 15 that I'll schedule in the second quarter plan. So there's really not as much time in there as usual. Oh, that's true. I didn't even think of that, Janny. Yeah, Arthurian legend and the Celtic myths. Yeah. So I definitely look forward to that with Fiona Var. So, but let's see some things coming up on the channel. I always keep notes in my phone if you're looking ahead to that. So next week I have my January books, and I went ahead and I filmed that yesterday and edited that because I'm out of town next weekend. But I read 8 books in January, some really great ones. The week after that, I'm planning on continuing my top 20 books countdown. So this will be books 20 through 11. And let me just tell you, my top 20 books of all time are just incredible. Like I'm at the point where some of these books where it's just one of those, like you need to look at these books as the best of the best, because some of these books, everybody I've talked with others and people are like, yeah, that's my favorite book of all time. And it'll be like 18 on my list because there's just one great book after another. So that'll be up February 23rd. I'll do my February books in March. And then I have planned either March 9th or 23rd. It's going to be my top 10 books of all time. And I keep going back and forth with my order at the top, but I think I have it pretty solid, and can't wait to do it because it's just, I love doing those countdowns because I just get to gush about the things I love most. Like I hate that on my video next week, I hate that I have to rant about a book because that's not my style, but I had to address some of the things in that book that I thought were just not very good. Anyway, where are we here? Looking for the Louis Armstrong. I realized you're still at 1K when Fairy Tale came out. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I hit 5. Once I hit 1K, I had a lot of bumps. And one thing that, just talking about the subs and everything, one thing that I've never forgotten is the channels that were bigger than me that gave me shout outs. Like Andrew's Wizardly Reads gave me some shout outs when I had like 1,000. Joanna was the same way. I never forget about that. Like Bryce at Shelf Centered, he retweeted me religiously when I had like 500 subs. So like, I never forget that. And I try to do the same for channels that are growing, because I know it's so hard to grow, especially in the early stages. So I always try my best to boost the smaller channels, just because I've been there and I know what it's like, and I'll never forget. And I'm always appreciative. Like I was on Philip's channel when I had 1,000 subs, and he said that, my channel was going to grow a lot, and I didn't believe him, but he was right. So I really love this community, and I just try to give back as much as possible. And I love it when I see a channel that's tiny and they pass me. And it's okay, because I think I was a subscriber from John at Talking Story when he was double digits. And it's so cool that he beat me to 10K. And I believe that I'm not lying about that. I'm very honest about that. I love that when I see the people that have great channels put in the work, that people find them, because there are a lot of great channels out there with like 400 subs. So it's really cool to see the growth. So that's one thing that I do love about having 10,000 subscribers is, my channel is somewhat big for BookTube, so I can actually, help out some other channels that are, just kind of grinding. So it's really, really cool. Heidi, I will never read One Piece. And that has nothing to do with One Piece, and has nothing to do with manga. But I have it's kind of like a brain chemistry issue that I can't read comic books or manga. My brain can't process and understand what's going on. It goes through kind of an overload of sensory data. Like an example, like as a kid, my mother would have me go to the pantry to get this certain item, and it would take me forever because I was unable to focus on just the overwhelming amount of things. And that was even as a kid, I couldn't read comic books because the art and everything, it was just too much for my brain to process. So I will never read One Piece or manga, and it's nothing against all of that because I just can't process it. My brain chemistry just can't deal with all of the arts. I just can't comprehend any of it. So yes, I agree. They were just awesome people. I just love the BookTube community as well. So yeah, One Piece is a pretty long one, but yeah, I have watched some anime. Yeah, and I can do it there. Maybe because it's a different medium, and I mean sometimes you got to read subtitles, but I don't have problems with that. But that's definitely not a problem for me. I wouldn't say I'm huge in anime, but I've liked, some of the things I've loved. I mean, I love the Studio Ghibli things. Like Spirited Away is probably like a top 5 movie of all time for me, period. So I do like the storytelling in that manner, but just with manga and comic books, it doesn't work for me. This is good, Brian. Nightclub owners, the composer not reading One Piece. Right? But Heidi's right, though. I mean, it is a way. I mean, you do see a lot of channels that embrace that. And I think it's great. I mean, stories are stories, no matter what the media are. But for me, it's just not going to work for me just because I can't, kind of comprehend. Yeah, Studio Ghibli is amazing. I mean, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle. Those are probably my 2 favorites. Probably because I discovered those first, and I've seen them the most times out of all of them. But here we are. But anyway, everybody, I'm going to go and have lunch. And this was 2.5-hour live stream. This was great. I really enjoyed all of you hanging out here. I hope there were no offense to any of the lower tiered books that I read last year. I always try to be as respectful in my reviews, and just always remember that art is subjective. So my opinion means nothing, to quote Mike's book reviews. I'm just a guy with Wi-Fi, so it's always subjective. So I hope there were no hard feelings with any of those rankings. But I really had a great reading year. Again, channel hit 10,000. I want to thank all of you for just coming and hanging out, whether you've been here once or you've been here dozens, if not hundreds of times at this point. I appreciate all of you. The community aspect of BookTube is so tremendous, and I'm just happy to be part of it, and I appreciate all of you being here. And yes, Janny, I'm going to go pop a throat lozenge because you can tell my voice is gone. But thank you, everybody. Look for another video from me next week on my January book reviews, and I look with hanging out with you on Team Replay in the chat, and I'll see all of you soon.